Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. 3 weeks ago, a cardboard box showed up on my doorstep. No return address, just my name, scrawled in shaky, almost panicked handwriting. It reminded me of someone elderly or deeply afraid. Maybe both. I might have tossed it aside like any other piece of junk mail, but something stopped me. A Navy postmark, faded, real, the kind they haven't used in decades. The stamp looked like it had traveled through time itself, as if the box had been lost in the mail system's guts for half a century before landing on my porch. Inside was a yellowed manila envelope, stiff with age. It held a few black and white photographs of a World War II destroyer escort ship, a small leather-bound journal that crackled when I opened it, and a single note card. 9 words scribbled in ink that bled slightly at the edges. They were never supposed to come back. God help us. The photographs showed the USS Eldridge, hull number DE-173. On paper, just another Cannon-class destroyer escort, launched in 1943 at the height of the war. Nothing special, nothing that should have stood out, but it did. If you've spent any time in military history, especially the classified side of it, you've heard whispers. The Eldridge has lived in the nightmares of naval personnel for over 80 years. It's a ghost story told behind closed doors, a ship whose name never appears in casual conversation. People don't just talk about the Philadelphia experiment. They look around first. At first glance, the photos seemed routine. Naval documentation of a warship, crew on deck, gun turrets, ocean in the background. But under proper lighting, things started to change. In some shots, crew members were blurred, while the rest of the image remained sharp. Not motion blur, something else. Like their bodies were shifting in and out of focus on purpose. In another photo, the hull of the ship rippled unnaturally, as though the metal was bending like waves. The worst one showed a group of sailors, lined up for inspection. Their faces were smeared in a strange greenish fog. Not a camera flaw, this was something else. Something the photographer didn't see, or maybe chose not to. I'm a journalist, 20 years in the field, focused almost exclusively on declassified military programs. I've dug through the black files on MK-Ultra, interviewed people who unknowingly took LSD in CIA-run hospitals. I've seen how deep the government's darker experiments go. But this felt different, colder, wrong on a deeper level. According to the files, testimonies, and long-forgotten whisperings, the USS Eldridge didn't just vanish from radar in 1943. It didn't sink. It didn't break down. It disappeared from reality. Some say it phased out of our world entirely, gone in a flash of green-blue light during a classified test at the Philadelphia Naval Shipyard. The box, I later found out, had been sent by a man named Dr. Robert Arnwell, retired Navy electrical technician. He died 3 days after mailing it. Official cause, heart attack. Natural causes, the obituary claimed. He served in WQ2, had a long career with the Department of Energy, and volunteered in the community. Nothing suspicious, except the timing and the contents of his journal. I pulled his service records. What was available anyway? Most of his activity during 1943 was either blacked out or completely missing. 6 whole months labelled simply as specialised training. No details. His assignments during that time were either scrubbed clean or redacted into meaninglessness. Even his appearance changed. Photos from before 1943 showed a man in his early 30s. The next available photo from 1944, he looked closer to 50. Deep lines, sunken eyes, like he'd lived through something that didn't just age him, it crushed something inside him. His final journal entry is burned into my brain. They're watching me. I've lived with this secret for too long. Someone needs to know the truth before they erase it completely. The headaches are getting worse. The same ones the Eldridge survivors described. I see things at the corners of my vision. Movement where nothing should move. I think they found me after all these years. I'm putting everything into this package. If you're reading this, then you're next in line to carry this burden. Be careful what you look for. You might find it. I should have left it alone. But some stories demand to be told, even when every instinct screams to walk away. Even when men who ask too many questions about certain naval operations from 1943 have a troubling habit of disappearing. The legend begins here. And God help me, I'm going to tell it. There's a tone to those words that's hard to fake. The kind of fear that doesn't come from paranoia. It comes from memory. Something real. Something suffered. The official record of the USS Eldridge is a maze of contradictions and omissions. Nothing lines up. Logbooks rewritten. Witnesses dead or missing. But over the years, I've pulled together fragments from declassified memos, deathbed confessions, and scraps of forgotten correspondence. Piece by piece, I've built what I believe is the closest thing to the truth. The Navy, in 1943, was testing something more than radar invisibility. They were reaching for something they didn't fully understand. Something that didn't belong in this world. And whatever it was, it came back with them. It began the way many military breakthroughs do, with urgent necessity, not ambition. German U-boats were tearing through Allied convoys in the Atlantic, decimating the very lifeline that kept Britain and the war effort alive. Torpedoes struck with deadly precision, and for every sunken cargo ship, hundreds of tons of food, weapons, and fuel vanished beneath the waves. The Navy needed more than stronger hulls or faster ships. They needed something radical, something that could make their vessels invisible to enemy eyes, and, more importantly, enemy radar and magnetic torpedoes. I found a declassified memo signed by Admiral Ernest King, the Chief of Naval Operations, at the time. The language was chilling in its bluntness. The Battle of the Atlantic hangs in the balance. If we cannot solve the U-boat problem within 6 months, we risk losing our supply lines to Europe entirely. Conventional solutions have proven insufficient. Unconventional approaches must be considered, regardless of their theoretical nature. That memo marked the genesis of Project Rainbow, what would eventually be known, outside official channels, as the Philadelphia Experiment. The science behind it stemmed from Albert Einstein's unified field theory, a concept he never finished. In public view, the theory attempted to link gravity and electromagnetism in a single framework. While the public believed the work incomplete, several internal communications suggest Einstein's research had quietly continued in classified military labs. He wasn't alone, either. Through a Freedom of Information Act request, I uncovered references to Nikola Tesla. Yes, that Tesla. According to one memo, he consulted briefly in late 1942. The document notes Tesla's unorthodox but promising approach to generating high-energy electromagnetic fields. His involvement apparently ended abruptly, shortly before his death in January 1943. One quote from the memo stood out. Tesla warns the consequences of field manipulation may be both profound and irreversible. He wanted them to stop, but they didn't. By then, the war machine was in full swing. Risk was no longer an obstacle. It was part of the strategy. The Navy moved forward. Dr. Robert Arnwell, the same man who mailed me the package before his death, documented much of what happened. In his journal, though the tone of his entries swings between clinical precision and quiet horror, the technical detail is staggering. They installed 4 massive electromagnetic generators along the ship's keel. Giant DEGs, degeneracy coils, were wrapped around the hull like vines of copper and steel. The amount of power required was off the charts, enough electricity to light up a small city. The energy would flow through a network of capacitors, which, according to Arnwell, were modelled on designs Tesla had left behind. We created a layered series of electromagnetic fields, he wrote. The objective was to bend radar waves around the ship, essentially creating a shell of distorted space-time. Radar would pass around the vessel like water around a rock. The notion of optical invisibility, making the ship literally vanish to the human eye, had been floated, but it was a fringe idea, not the primary goal. At least, not officially. The schematics I discovered folded into the journal's binding showed equipment unlike anything standard for 1943. There were coils, field nodes, and what appeared to be resonance chambers, none of which were found on other Navy vessels of the time. The notes in the margins were even stranger. Resonant phase drift, 0.7 seconds. Localized field laps may destabilize hull integrity. Organic displacement, unclear. These weren't just engineering concerns. They were warnings. Warnings that no one listened to. According to Unwind, the Navy never intended for the ship, or its crew, to vanish. The goal was radar cloaking. But the technology, still deeply theoretical, behaved in ways they hadn't predicted. On October 28, 1943, after weeks of calibration and smaller field tests, the Navy ordered a full-scale trial. The USS Eldridge, fully crewed and operational, was to activate the field array under live conditions. Arnwell's journal is blunt about the decision. It was a mistake to have a full crew on board. We told them. The math was untested. The fields were powerful enough to interfere with basic neural activity. We didn't know how human tissue would react, but Admiral Moore insisted. He wanted combat-realistic data. And the crew? They were terrified. One entry haunts me. There were rumors of men vomiting blood during earlier tests, lights flickering even when systems were off. Some swore they saw shadows where shadows shouldn't fall. At least 3 sailors requested transfers. All denied. One kid, fresh out of basic, maybe 19, he begged his commanding officer to let him off the ship. I heard it myself. "Sir, I don't want to die in there." No one listened. They powered up the generators just before noon. The sky was clear, dry autumn air. Civilians in nearby yards reported a low, whining hum that shook their windows. Birds scattered, dogs barked. Then, silence. Total silence. The ship disappeared. He told me the dreams had started weeks before the experiment, always the same. He was drowning in a sea of green light, unable to breathe, unable to scream. The panic in his eyes that morning felt too real to ignore. But protocol was protocol. They sedated him and sent him back to his post aboard the Eldridge. We never saw him again. At exactly 0900 hours, the generators were powered up. A low hum vibrated through the dockyards, and a surge of electricity pulsed through the ship's newly modified systems. Then, something strange happened. People on nearby vessels and along the shore watched in stunned silence as a dense, glowing, green fog rolled out from the Eldridge. It wasn't natural mist. It shimmered, alive somehow, lit from within like it had a mind of its own. Then came the screams. The sound tore across the water, loud, raw, and unmistakable. Dozens of men, howling in agony and terror. The kind of screaming that makes your skin crawl, that tells you something has gone terribly wrong. Workers on shore stood frozen, too far away to help, but close enough to hear every gut-wrenching second. And just like that, the screams stopped. Not faded, stopped. Cut off like someone threw a switch. The fog pulsed violently, flared so bright it blinded the onlookers, and then collapsed inward. Gone. The USS Eldridge had vanished. All that remained was a patch of still, rippling water. No explosion, no debris, not even a wake. Just nothing. Franklin Reno, a civilian engineer who was there that day, and whose dying confession I recorded 5 years ago, told me the disappearance didn't just defy logic, it shattered it. He said it was like reality glitched. His voice was a rasp when he told me. The ship didn't disappear. The space did. The water didn't rush in. It just paused. Like that part of the world had stopped existing for a few seconds. Physics says that can't happen. There should have been a massive displacement, a wave, something, but there wasn't. Reno knew then, as I do now, that we had done something profoundly wrong, something that shouldn't be possible. Military timekeepers later confirmed what the logs showed. For exactly 18 minutes, the Eldridge ceased to exist in Philadelphia. It wasn't cloaked or hidden. It wasn't there. What happened in those 18 minutes would have rewritten everything we know about time and space, if the truth had ever been allowed out. The first sign that things had gone catastrophically wrong didn't come from Philadelphia. It came from Norfolk, Virginia, over 275 miles away. At 0909 hours, 9 minutes after the Eldridge disappeared, radar operators at Norfolk Naval Base picked up a strange contact. Then dock personnel started, shouting. A ship had just appeared in the water, out of nowhere, shrouded in that same eerie green fog. For 3 minutes, it hovered there, flickering like a broken transmission. Like reality couldn't quite hold it in place. Sailors on the dock swore they could see through parts of the hull, like the ship was made of smoke and static. But they saw enough to identify it. It was the Eldridge. Then, just as suddenly, it was gone again. At exactly 0918 hours, the green fog reappeared in Philadelphia, coalescing in the space where the ship had vanished. The Eldridge returned, but something had changed. The ship looked wrong, twisted, warped, silent. Dr. Unwind was one of the first to board. His journal entry from that day is barely legible, the handwriting jagged, frantic, like his hand couldn't keep up with his thoughts. God forgive us, the men. I can't describe it. There are no words, not in science, not in scripture. Later entries, written with a steadier hand but a broken heart, gave more detail. 5 sailors were just gone. No bodies, no remains, nothing. Others had become part of the ship, literally fused into the steel. One man was embedded in the bulkhead, only his arm and half his face visible. Another was locked into the deck plates, torso melted into, metal like wax into stone. They were alive, screaming, for a few moments before their bodies gave out. One sailor, Mitchell, was described in horrifying detail. His legs were inside the deck, Unwind wrote. His hands, outstretched, still moved, still reached for help. And his eyes, God, his eyes. When we told him we couldn't save him, I saw it. He understood. That's what haunts me, not the blood, not the metal. The understanding in his eyes. Those who looked untouched on the outside were often worse off inside. Some sat silently, unmoving. Others convulsed violently. Many didn't recognize where or when they were. Their voices came out seconds before or after their mouths moved. Their limbs twitched like marionettes pulled by broken strings. Dr. Unwind called it temporal discontinuity. They weren't synced with time anymore. Then there were the ones who seemed fine at first. Chief Petty Officer William Chambers walked off that ship on his own. 3 days later, witnesses say he walked straight through a wall. No trick, no illusion. His body turned partially transparent, then passed through solid steel like smoke. And it wasn't just once. Several people saw it. He didn't understand it either. His final report simply read, "I don't feel right, like I'm not here all the way." Whatever happened during those 18 minutes didn't just bend the laws of physics, it broke the men who lived through it. During his final recorded episode, Chief Petty Officer William Chambers calmly stood up from his bed, looked at the wall in his quarters, and walked straight through it. No sound, no flash, just gone. No one ever saw him again. Seaman Richard Hayes didn't vanish so suddenly. His disappearance happened slowly, horribly. Over the course of a week, witnesses reported his body growing increasingly translucent, like fog dispersing. He could still speak, still move, still feel, but by the time of a scheduled medical examination, Hayes had faded completely. Doctors watched helplessly as he dissolved into nothingness right there on the exam table. Instruments recorded no heartbeat, no brain activity, just an empty room. Lieutenant Jim Barton didn't wait to disappear. On November 4th, 1943, he left a single-line suicide note before putting a bullet through his temple. "We were ghosts in our own bodies. Still are. I can feel myself spreading thin across somewhere else." It was chilling. Not just what he said, but the calm, resigned way he wrote it. Of all the survivors, the only one who gave a full account, one that wasn't garbled, incomplete, or entirely incoherent, was engineer's mate Daniel Green. His classified debriefing, which I found buried in misfiled naval intelligence records, painted a picture more terrifying than anything in the official narrative. Green said it all went wrong the second the generators powered up. The air thickened, he recalled, like breathing soup. Every breath burned. Then, colours started bleeding out of the walls. Colours I don't even have names for. They poured off everything. Pipes, railings, our uniforms, like the world was leaking. Then came the pain. Not like a wound, he explained. It was inside out. Like our cells were being peeled backwards, one by one. We started screaming. I didn't even realize I was screaming until I ran out of air. And then, suddenly, they weren't in Philadelphia anymore. Green said the ship floated in what he called a window. Through that window, they saw Norfolk. It was clear as day. The water, the docks, the shore. Some of the crew panicked and tried to jump through. They didn't make it. Or maybe they did. I don't know. God help them. But what terrified Green the most wasn't that they were in two places at once. It was that they were also somewhere else entirely. Another layer, he whispered in the recording. Not a place, not really. Something beneath everything. It had angles that shouldn't exist. Space bent the wrong way. The ship floated like it didn't belong there. And neither did we. And then came the presence. There were things there, he said, not just watching. Aware. They weren't supposed to know about us. We weren't supposed to see them, but we did. And now, they know. And they're curious. Green was kept in a psychiatric ward under 24-hour supervision. 3 weeks later, a nurse walked into his room and found only a neatly made bed and a cup of hot coffee, steam still rising from the surface. He was gone. No alarms, no witnesses, no body. The Navy acted fast after the Eldridge reappeared. Within hours, Project Rainbow was shut down. The termination wasn't just procedural, it was surgical. My investigation found evidence of 3 coordinated efforts to erase what had happened. First, destroy the evidence. The Eldridge was overhauled immediately. All experimental equipment was stripped out. Sections of the hull where the crew had fused with metal were cut out, sealed in concrete, and dropped into the deepest parts of the Atlantic. Dr. Arnwell personally confirmed this in one of his final entries, scrawled in a shaky hand. We couldn't scrub it, so we buried it where no one would ever find it. Second, scatter the witnesses. The scientists were quietly reassigned to obscure departments, their research careers redirected or ended entirely. Surviving crew members were separated, monitored, and threatened with treason if they spoke. Some were forcibly committed to mental institutions, given psychiatric labels that would undermine their credibility forever. Third, control the narrative. A full disinformation campaign followed. The Navy altered ship logs to show the Eldridge had never been in Philadelphia on October 28th. Medical records vanished. Families were told their sons and husbands died in training mishaps or enemy engagements. In one internal memo dated November 2nd, 1943, Naval Intelligence advised the Secretary of the Navy, "Complete information containment regarding Project Rainbow is essential to national security. The theoretical implications alone could destabilize scientific consensus. The practical applications, if exploited by hostile nations, represent a direct existential threat to our warfighting capability." Even more disturbing was a heavily redacted document linking Project Rainbow to an obscure research initiative called MTOK. The context is unclear, but the implication is that the project wasn't truly abandoned, just driven deeper underground. But what stays with me most is a single page from a psychological review, marked top secret and bearing the seal of the Office of Naval Intelligence. Despite efforts to silence the survivors, the page noted, all subjects report exposure to non-human intelligences during the 18-minute event. While such accounts are often attributed to psychosis or trauma, the uniformity of detail and consistency across multiple isolated sources suggest a shared encounter of unknown nature. They weren't hallucinating. They saw something, and it saw them. The recommendation in the official assessment was brief and unsettling. Do not attempt any further contact with these intelligences. Risks are unknown, potentially catastrophic. That was it. No elaboration, no warnings, just a quiet, clinical order to walk away. Still, despite the thoroughness of the cover-up, whispers lingered. Civilian workers at the shipyard talked behind closed doors. Family members asked questions that never had satisfying answers, and the survivors, those who hadn't vanished or died, carried a silent truth in their shattered minds. Over the decades, the Philadelphia experiment shifted from a top-secret incident to something resembling urban folklore. The government leaned into the absurdity, branding any leaked details as nothing more than conspiracy theory. It was the perfect misdirection. Hide the truth in plain sight. Just make it sound too ridiculous to believe. It took me 17 months to track down Marcus Leary. His name had surfaced only once in Dr. Arnold's personal journal, a scribbled line beside a coffee stain. Kids saw everything, never said a word. Smart boy. Finding him was like chasing a ghost. The name Marcus Leary led me to a military record that showed an honorable discharge in 1946 and a return to civilian life in Ohio. But that Marcus Leary died in 1994. The physical description in the record didn't match a grainy group photo I'd found of the Philadelphia Naval Yard crew. So I dug deeper. I spent weeks running facial recognition comparisons from that photo against declassified personnel databases. I analyzed height metrics, dental records, even minor facial asymmetries. Eventually, I found a match, but under a different name. According to official records, Marcus Leary had become Michael Lake Durham, then Martin Lewis, and finally settled as Harold Weber in 1973. The real Marcus Leary had been buried under layers of bureaucracy and false identities. I spent another 3 months tracking property ownership patterns, unusual social security entries, and obscure tax records. Finally, I found him. A small coastal town in Oregon, living alone in a quiet house that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. Harold Weber, formerly Seaman Marcus Leary, was 97 years old. His house was modest and neat. The grass was trimmed with care, the hedges shaped with precision. When I knocked, I half expected no answer. Instead, a man with sharp eyes and a quiet presence opened the door and calmly studied me. Inside, his home was sterile of memories, no photographs, no souvenirs, no signs that anyone else had ever been part of his life. The only personal touch was a small model ship resting on the mantelpiece. Not the Eldridge, but a humble fishing boat. I later learned it was a replica of his father's old vessel from childhood. When I introduced myself, he asked only one question, his voice laced with suspicion and a faint trace of Philadelphia that hadn't been erased by decades out west. "How did you find me?" I explained. The path I'd followed, the discrepancies, the aliases, the anomalies in the records. He listened, nodding slowly, as if unsurprised. "They're getting sloppy," he muttered. "Or maybe they just don't give a damn anymore. Most of us are dead anyway." He paused, then looked me in the eye. I knew someone would come eventually. He motioned for me to sit, and we drank tea together at his small kitchen table. His hands were steady, his eyes piercing. They didn't dart or tremble. They just watched, waiting to see if I was worth the truth. They're all gone now, he said quietly. The ones who gave the orders, the ones who made the threats. I'm the last one, the last witness. We sat for 3 hours. I recorded everything as he spoke, his voice becoming softer as he approached the core of what he'd seen. He hadn't been on the Eldridge. That was important to him. He wanted me to understand. I was stationed at a monitoring post near the dock, recording equipment. I wasn't even supposed to be there, he said with a half smile. Last-minute swap. Wrong place, wrong time. If I'd been on my usual shift, I'd never have seen it. Never had to live with it. He described that morning at the shipyard in haunting detail. The strange, unsettled energy. High-ranking officers everywhere. Guards posted at every entrance. People whispering nervously. Everyone knew something unusual was going on, but they assumed it was just another radar calibration test or a classified weapons demo. Only a select few knew the real goal. Leary had been responsible for calibrating instruments designed to monitor electromagnetic field fluctuations. His station had a clear view of the Eldridge, sitting quietly in the harbour like any other destroyer escort. But the moment they activated the generators, everything changed. The instruments went nuts, he said, his eyes distant. Readings all over the place. Numbers that didn't make sense. I tapped the gauges thinking they were broken. He fell silent, staring past me like he was back there again. There was this hum, deep, low frequency. You felt it more than you heard it, like it was inside your skull. Then the ship, it shimmered. That's the only way I can describe it, like a heat mirage. And then it started to vanish. He looked down at his hands, which had begun to tremble slightly now. It wasn't sudden. It was like reality didn't know what to do with it. 1 second it was there, the next it wasn't, but not in the way things disappear. It was like it slipped out of sync with the world. The water around it churned like something was still there, but your eyes said it was gone. What did you do? I asked quietly. He looked at me, his face unreadable. I froze. Everyone did. Then there was screaming on the radios. Feedback. Alarms. I remember someone shouting to shut it down, but it was too late. He drew in a long breath, then exhaled slowly. When it came back, it didn't come back right. Some of the men, they were embedded in the hull. One was halfway into a bulkhead, like the wall had grown around him. Others were burned, but not like from fire, like they'd been microwaved from the inside out. He stood then, walked to the window, and looked out at the grey Pacific. That was the day I stopped trusting what I see, what we think we know. He turned to face me. They said it was about radar, stealth. But it wasn't. They were trying to tear through space, fold it, move a ship in ways no one understood, and they got it wrong. He shook his head slowly. I kept my mouth shut because I didn't want to end up like the others, and they let me live, gave me a new name. But every night I still see it, the moment the world blinked and showed its teeth. We sat in silence for a while after that. The tape recorder clicked softly as it reached the end. The needles on the monitoring equipment spun so violently they snapped. Paper charts ripped as ink pens jerked across them uncontrollably. The headphones, clamped over Marcus Leary's ears, filled with a sound he still couldn't describe. A swarm of whispers in languages that didn't exist, overlapping, layered, as if time itself had started mumbling. When I asked him what exactly he'd witnessed, that day, he fell into a heavy silence. Nearly a full minute passed. Then, in a voice low and uncertain, he said, "You ever seen a man's timeline split?" I waited. Actually split. Like watching someone live through every moment of their life all at once, past, present, future, crashing together inside their body. His eyes didn't meet mine. He was staring at the tea in his cup like it might ripple again with something unspeakable. "That's what happened to those poor bastards on the Eldridge," he continued. "Some aged decades in seconds, skin shriveled, hair turned white, joints locking up like dried leather. Others, they went backwards, infants in uniforms. One of them, Jesus." He paused again. breathing in hard through his nose. "I saw a man walking backward through time," he said finally. "On the deck, Lieutenant James Wilkins. Good man. Had a wife, 3 kids waiting for him back home. I knew him. Friendly guy." As the field intensified, I could see something was wrong. He kept glancing around like he was confused by where he was. Then it started. His hair turned dark, wrinkles vanished, his spine straightened. And then he swallowed. I could see. It was physically painful for him to remember. He was 10, just a boy, wearing a uniform that didn't fit anymore, screaming, high-pitched, panicked. Didn't understand what was happening to him. Seconds later, the ship vanished, and so did he. Leary went quiet again. I let the silence hang. When he spoke next, his voice was dry and hoarse. There was a fog, green, thick. It came from nowhere, but it wasn't just fog. It moved against the wind. You understand what I'm saying? It was alive, like it was thinking, curious. I saw it reach out with tendrils, like fingers, touching equipment, brushing against men. When it touched them, they changed. Not just outside. Something in their eyes. Like whatever was looking out from behind them wasn't the same anymore. He rubbed his arms, like the memory brought a chill with it. But what really stuck with me was what came after. He looked out the window toward the ocean, silent for a moment. They didn't mean to hurt us. The Navy, I mean. They didn't know what they were doing. They weren't trying to weaponize it. They were just pushing boundaries they didn't understand. And the problem is, space isn't empty. He turned to me then, voice steady but soft. It's listening. Always has been. When I asked him what he meant, Leary stared into the horizon like he was trying to see beyond it. There are gaps, he said. Spaces between places, between moments, and things live there. Always have. The experiment tore a hole, just a little tear, but it was enough. We became visible to them. Before that day, we were nothing. Like bacteria, you only notice under a microscope. His hand shook slightly as he set his teacup down. But once you see something, you can't unsee it. And once it sees you, he trailed off. They're still watching, still curious. He leaned forward then and told me something I hadn't read in any of the declassified files, any of the redacted reports or underground testimonies. It wasn't just the ship that came back wrong. It was everything around it. The air, the water, the light. The entire area changed. I asked him to explain. Plants started dying off. Shrubs, trees, grass. Gone in days. Birds wouldn't come near for months. Just stopped flying over the shipyard. And the workers, 3 of them died within weeks. Ones who helped haul equipment off the Eldridge. Some kind of wasting disease. Their bodies just gave up. Cells stopped holding together. Doctors couldn't explain it. No virus. No known illness, just nothing left to fix. He rolled up his sleeve and showed me his forearm. A spray of scars, thin lines like lightning trapped under the skin, fanned out in a starburst pattern. I touched one of the recording units, he said. Just for a second, it felt like holding ice and fire at the same time. The doctors called it radiation burns, said it looked like frostbite layered over thermal damage, but they couldn't explain how. They just shook their heads. I asked why he hadn't come forward earlier. He let out a low laugh. Cold. Empty. I did. Once. Back in '56. Gave a talk at a private conference. Thought I could hint at it. Leave breadcrumbs. That night, 2 men showed up at my house. Didn't say a word. Just left a manila folder on my kitchen table. He looked me in the eye. Inside were pictures. My sister's kids, walking home from school. No message, no threats, just those photos. He rubbed his temples again, something he'd done repeatedly throughout our conversation. I asked if he was in pain. The headache started after the experiment, he said. Never stopped. Feels like something drilling inside. And sometimes, when it gets really bad, I hear voices. Not loud, just beneath the noise, talking about me, like I'm an insect under a microscope, discussing what I'll do next, how I'll react. He leaned back, face pale. No doctor's ever found a reason for it, but I know what it is. It's them, still studying us, the ones who were there. As I packed up, he gripped my wrist tightly, stronger than I expected from a man his age. Anyone who digs too deep into Philadelphia, he said, locking eyes with me. They end up dead, or worse. I asked him what he meant by worse. He paused, expression grim. Dead is simple, but some of the men who went looking for answers, they got lost. Lost how? I asked. He didn't blink. Outside. Outside of what? Time, he said. You'll know it's happening when your life starts playing out of order. When you remember conversations from tomorrow. When you wake up knowing things you haven't done yet. Then he let go of my arm, sat back, and looked out the window again, watching the waves like they might whisper something back. When you see yourself across the street, staring back at you, that's when it begins. I was packing up my recorder, ready to leave, when he gave me a final warning. His voice was low, steady, like someone trying to keep calm while standing too close to a cliff's edge. If your coffee stays hot too long, he said, not looking at me. If shadows move when they shouldn't. If you catch a reflection in a mirror and there's nothing to reflect, stop. Stop right there. Burn your notes. Forget everything you've learned. It's not too late until it is. Then, without a word, he reached out and pressed something into my palm. It was small, smooth, and strangely warm to the touch. I turned it over in my hand. A dull metallic pebble that almost seemed to vibrate faintly against my skin. Iron meteorite, he explained. They don't like iron from space. It's different. Different origin. Different rules. Keep it on you at all times. It won't save you, but it might buy you a few seconds to run. That might be enough. I nodded, unsure what to say. I thanked him for his time, for his honesty, and maybe even for his bravery. I left his house with the recorder, the stone, and a headache building behind my eyes. 3 days later, I called to follow up with a few more questions. A woman answered. "This is Sandra with Lakeside Realty," she said cheerfully. I paused. "I'm trying to reach Harold Weber." "Oh," she replied, her tone shifting slightly. "Mr. Weber sold that property last month. Moved out, actually. Can I help you with something?" I blinked, unsure what to say. "I interviewed him 3 days ago," I finally said. "He was there." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I don't think that's possible," she said slowly. "The Harold Weber I worked with was in his early 60s. Fit. Wore glasses sometimes. He wasn't in his 90s, if that's what you mean." I asked her about his eye color. She hesitated, then said, "Blue. A pale blue, kind of washed out. Same as the man I met." The next day, I drove back to Oregon. The house was empty, the front gate chained, windows dark. I asked around. Neighbors confirmed that Harold Weber had lived there for as long as anyone could remember, but he'd always been maybe 65, 70 tops. Worked from home, quiet guy, consultant of some kind. When I showed one neighbor a photo I'd taken during our interview, an old man, pale and gaunt, sunken eyes, white beard, he stared for a long time before quietly saying, "That's not him." "What do you mean?" I asked. He looked back at me, uneasy. "You're sitting alone in that picture." I looked at the screen again. The photo now showed me, gesturing as if speaking to someone. But the chair across from me was empty. I've searched for both versions of Harold Weber, or Marcus Leary, if that was even his real name. I haven't found either. This morning, as I prepared to finalize my notes and publish the article, I decided to review the interview audio one more time. It played back exactly as I remembered. Harold's, or Leary's, calm voice describing strange fogs, inexplicable disappearances, the feeling of something watching from behind the veil. Then, at the 47-minute mark, something changed. In the middle of him describing a green mist rolling in from the mountains, another voice entered the recording. Not his, not mine. A third voice. "We see you now," it said, quiet and deliberate. Through his eyes. Through the hole he brought back inside. Him. "Your world is so solid, so limited. We can help with that." It went on for 12 seconds. The first few words were in English. Then, the language twisted into something else. The sounds that followed. I heard them, but I couldn't comprehend them. They seemed to echo in my head, like a song you've heard in a dream but can't remember. My ears accepted the sounds. My brain refused to understand. I ran the audio through every tool I had. Spectrum analysis, noise isolation, frequency mapping. A sound engineer friend looked at the waveform and shook his head. "This shouldn't be possible," he said. "These frequencies, they overlap in ways that break the laws of physics. They intersect like a Mobius strip made of sound." He asked me where I got the recording. I didn't answer, and then the photo on my wall began to change. It's an old framed image of the USS Eldridge, sent to me in a package years ago by Dr. Arnold, another researcher, now missing. I used to look at it often. 18 sailors standing on deck, captured in grainy black and white. Yesterday morning, I counted them again, absent-mindedly. 17. This morning, 15. Every time I glance at it, another figure is gone, just vanished from the frame. The rest remain still, posed, but they don't seem to notice what's happening. I tried to document it, took high-res digital photos of the frame every hour today. In the digital versions, all 18 sailors are still there, no change. But in the physical photo, the one in the frame, they keep disappearing. I've started watching it for long stretches, afraid to blink, but I have to look away eventually. Then there's the journal, the one Harold, or whatever he was, gave me. When I first read it, it was filled with handwritten notes, personal thoughts, observations about what he called dimensional scars and the bleeding sky. Now, some pages are different. Equations I can't decipher. Advanced math, complex geometries, strange field maps that reference 5 dimensions and electromagnetic phase shifts. The diagrams shift slightly when I tilt the page, like optical illusions, except they feel like they're watching back. Even English words have started to rearrange themselves when I'm not looking. A sentence about quantum dissonance turned into anchor collapse, time fold imminent. Another page now shows something that looks like instructions. A blueprint. A method for recreating the Philadelphia experiment using modern hardware. I burned that page as soon as I realized what it was. Some things shouldn't be known. Some knowledge is a trap disguised as a gift. I don't know what to believe anymore. Maybe I never really did. My digital recordings are corrupting. Files I've reviewed dozens of times now stutter, skip, or play distorted audio layered with faint whispers that shouldn't be there. My handwritten notes, the ones I've meticulously documented, now contain passages I don't recall writing. The ink looks like mine. The style almost matches, but the strokes, they're off. Slight curves where I'd normally go straight. A different pressure applied to the paper. It's like a version of me with slightly different handwriting habits is trying to reach across the page. The meteorite, the one Liri gave me, reacts to these moments. It grows warm against my skin, like it's absorbing something invisible. Sometimes it vibrates, gently but insistently, like a warning I don't know how to interpret. Twice now, I've woken up to find it no longer where I left it before sleep. Once, it had rolled to the opposite side of my desk. Another time, it lay beside my pillow, perfectly still, as if placed there by hands I didn't hear or see. Last Tuesday, I received a phone call from Dr. Arnold. That would have been fine if he hadn't died over a month ago. The caller ID listed his number, time-stamped and logged like any other. But when I tried calling it back, I was routed to a rusted-out weather station in Antarctica, one officially decommissioned in 1986. The line was patchy, filled with static, but his voice still cut through, thin and far away. "You need to stop," he said. No greeting, no hesitation. "They're using your curiosity as an anchor. Every question you ask pulls them closer. Every file you dig up, it widens the breach. You're not investigating anymore. You're feeding it." I tried to interrupt. "Who are they?" He let out a short, humorless laugh. "We don't have words for what they are. They exist in the spaces between seconds, between atoms. They've always been there, watching, waiting. They never noticed us, until we tore a hole through the skin of reality. Now they're interested. And when they're interested, things unravel." His voice faded briefly beneath a hiss of static. Then came his final words, slow, deliberate. "Time doesn't mean the same thing to them. They see every version of you at once. Every fork, every decision, every life you could have lived. And they tweak things, test outcomes. You're not observing them anymore. They're experimenting on you." The line went dead. My phone hasn't worked properly since. Calls drop without warning. Sometimes, in the middle of conversations, I hear faint voices layered beneath the main call, whispering things neither party said. Phrases like "he's noticing" or "change vector compromised." 3 days ago, I was at the National Archives when I stumbled across a declassified naval intelligence report from 1943 to 1945. It detailed a series of unexplained events in and around the Philadelphia Naval Yard, compass needles spinning with no magnetic interference, clocks that ran backwards for minutes at a time, equipment shorting out despite no electrical anomalies. But the most disturbing part, several sailors who had never served aboard the USS Eldridge began to exhibit symptoms identical to those who had. Disorientation, memory collapse, dissociative hallucinations. The final page of the report held a handwritten note penned in urgent, uneven script by a naval admiral. The name had been blacked out. "We may have sealed the worst of it, but this is only a delay. The barrier is paper thin now. It will fail. And I pray to God none of us live to see the moment it tears." Yesterday, outside my apartment, a place where vagrants never linger, I saw a homeless man huddled near the curb. Something about him made me stop. When he looked up, I felt a wave of cold recognition wash over me. Seaman Richard Hayes. He'd served aboard the Eldridge, one of the few whose disappearance had been quietly noted in a confidential memo marked New 43. I'd seen his photo, memorized the face. And now somehow, here he was, unchanged by time. He hadn't aged a day. He stared at me with dull, tired eyes and slowly nodded. "You're looking for us," he said. It wasn't a question, just a fact. "Where have you been?" I asked, my voice catching. His lips twitched. Maybe a smile, maybe a grimace. Everywhere, nowhere, between. His voice, it echoed, not in the air around us, but inside my head, like it was being spoken from multiple versions of him, simultaneously, all slightly out of sync. "Time doesn't flow the way you think it does," he continued. "Some days I'm here. Some days I blink and it's 20 years later. But we're always on the ship." I blinked. "The Eldridge?" He looked past me, eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. "The ship isn't just in Philadelphia anymore. It's been fragmented, torn across timelines, split across dimensions. We're stuck in the bleed." I reached out instinctively, but he flinched and stepped back. "You've drawn their attention too," he said. "They see you now. They're watching. Through every screen, every mirror, every silence between thoughts." I wanted to ask more, but when I blinked again, he was gone, just gone, and the meteorite in my pocket was burning hot. Pieces of it exist across different points in space and time. And we exist across them too. Spread thin, like a shadow cast across fractured mirrors. Sometimes those fragments line up just right. And when they do, we slip through, just for a moment, back into your world. He grabbed my arm. His hand was ice cold, like something dredged from deep water. I flinched, but he held firm. "There, using the gaps," he said, voice low and urgent. "The ones we tore open, between seconds, between thoughts. They're prying them wider, learning how your reality works, preparing for something." I opened my mouth to ask what he meant, but he suddenly froze. His body went rigid, eyes wide, staring past me. "They found me again," he whispered, barely audible. "Iron from the stars. Remember that. It disrupts their perception. They can't..." He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't run, didn't hide. He just stopped being. One moment he was there, the next, gone, like a breath held too long. I stood alone on the sidewalk, heart pounding. A small puddle had formed where he stood. It shimmered oddly in the streetlight, and when I had it analysed by a friend who owed me a few favours, it contained microscopic sea organisms, creatures no one had seen before, creatures that shouldn't even exist anymore. Not now, not in this epoch. This will be my final report on the Philadelphia experiment. Not because I've lost interest or because the evidence has dried up, but because I'm no longer sure I'm anchored. Last night, I woke up and saw myself standing at the foot of the bed. Not a dream. I was awake. I remember the chill in the air. The smell, salt water and ozone, sharp and unnatural. I watched me sleep. When our eyes met, he smiled, but it wasn't comfort. It was resignation. Maybe pity. "It gets easier," he said softly. "Once you stop fighting the transitions." I blinked, and he was gone. Just a shimmer in the air. The scent of a storm over the ocean lingered. This morning, I found something on the mirror. Writing. In the condensation. But my apartment is climate controlled. No steam, no humidity. The glass should have been clear. Coordinates. In the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. Below them, written in my handwriting, "The Eldridge is still out there, still between, and it's trying to come home." I don't remember writing that. I've destroyed most of my research, burned the papers, wiped the drives, the artifacts, mailed them to scattered PO boxes with instructions. "Do not open for 50 years. This is the only thing left. My testimony." What happens when humans open doors they don't understand? When we poke things that were never meant to be touched? The Philadelphia experiment wasn't just a military failure. It wasn't just a ship that vanished. It was something else. A handshake in the dark. A beacon. We made first contact. They hadn't noticed us before. Now they do. And they're watching. Patient. Curious. I don't know exactly what the Navy did back in 1943, but I know this. They reached too far, and now something is reaching back. Elias Finch could smell the rot of war and the salt of the sea in the air as he trudged down the muddy street, collar turned up against the wind. His boots sank into the grime with every step. The notebook, in his inner coat pocket, pressed reassuringly against his chest. He was 36, but war and hard truths had aged him fast. His face had taken on sharp, weary angles, eyes that missed nothing. A journalist's eyes, the kind that had seen too much and still wanted more. Truth was the first thing to die in wartime. Peace didn't bring it back. It just buried the corpse deeper. He turned onto F Street, approaching the boarding house where he rented a modest room. Unremarkable. Forgettable. That's how he liked it. In his line of work, anonymity was worth more than gold. He published The Honest Witness, a hand-printed underground pamphlet that had exposed corruption and profiteering in the war machine. He'd made enemies, dangerous ones, But his words had spread, passed from hand to hand like contraband scripture. People wanted the truth, even if it burned. The war may be ending, he muttered to himself as he climbed the stairs. But the real fight's just getting started. Inside, his room was chaos masquerading as order. Papers blanketed every surface. Letters from sources, newspaper clippings, scraps of notes. In the corner stood his press, humming quietly, an old but reliable machine capable of cranking out hundreds of copies in a single night. He lit the oil lamp. Shadows danced on the walls. From under a loose floorboard, he pulled out his latest draft. He ran a hand over the headline, bold even for him. Serpents in the cabinet, Lincoln surrounded. By traitors, he frowned. It was dangerous, but it felt right. 3 knocks at the door. A pause. Then 2 more. His blood went cold. It was the signal, one known only to a few. He stood slowly, heart beginning to race, and reached into the drawer for the revolver he kept there, not for use, but for comfort. He opened the door. The signal. 3 quick knocks. A pause. 2 more. Elias opened the door with caution, fingers brushing the revolver hidden behind the doorframe. Standing in the dim hallway was a gaunt, weathered man in a wrinkled Union uniform, Colonel James Simmons. His face was pale and drawn, the deep lines beneath his eyes more severe than Elias remembered. The man looked like he hadn't slept in days. "Colonel Simmons," Elias muttered, stepping aside quickly. "You shouldn't be here. We were supposed to meet at Harper's tomorrow." Simmons didn't respond immediately. He stepped inside with the careful, haunted movements of someone expecting a shot from behind. He removed his cap, revealing hair gone almost completely grey, too soon for his age. His hands trembled faintly. "Tomorrow might be too late," he said. Elias shut the door and bolted it behind him. "What is it?" he asked, already moving toward the small cabinet where he kept a bottle of whiskey. "Another contract scandal. More missing arms shipments." Simmons shook his head and accepted the glass Elias handed him. He downed it in one rough swallow. "This isn't just about money anymore," he said hoarsely. "It's about power, the kind you don't see until it's too late. Now that the fighting's over, they're planning how to hold it. For good." Elias frowned, scribbling in his notebook. "Lincoln's making enemies faster than he can count them. That much isn't news." "No," Simmons said, leaning forward, voice dropping. "It's worse than that. There've been meetings. Secret ones. Men from the military, the cabinet, bankers, industrialists. They talk about a necessary transition, about securing the victory permanently." "Names," Elias said, suddenly sharper. "I need names, Colonel. I don't have them, all. They're careful, but I've seen insignias. Strange ones, not military. A phoenix rising from flames, burned into documents, sewn discreetly into uniforms." He glanced toward the window, eyes scanning the shadows outside. "And Stanton?" he added. "Secretary Stanton. He's in the center of it somehow." "Stanton!" Elias leaned back in surprise. "He's Lincoln's most trusted man." "Exactly. Too trusted. He's the one they wouldn't question. Watch the Treasury building tomorrow night, Finch. Midnight. Back entrance. You'll see who shows up." Simmons stood abruptly, hands clenched at his sides. "Be careful who you trust. The war made new alliances. Some of them aren't out in the open." Then he was gone, slipping out the door and into the night without another word. Elias stood in the silence, the lamplight flickering. He tried to shake off the unease, but Simmons had seemed genuinely rattled, not like a man chasing ghosts, more like one being chased. He couldn't sleep. He paced the room, mind turning over names, symbols, timelines. Could Stanton really be part of a conspiracy to seize control after the war? Or had Simmons finally cracked under the pressure? As darkness deepened, Elias put on his coat and hat, tucked the revolver into his waistband, and stepped into the night. Washington after sundown was a different place. The streets still carried the echoes of celebration, laughter, music, voices drifting from taverns and open windows. But beneath the joy there was a tension, a strange electricity. He kept to the side streets, his boots whispering over cobblestones slick with spring dew. Lafayette Square loomed ahead, quiet beneath the moonlight. That's when he saw them. A line of carriages, unmarked, black, with heavy curtains drawn over the windows, moved silently toward the executive mansion. Not government transport. Something else. Something discreet, trained, military precision in their movement. As the lead carriage passed under a gas lamp, Elias caught a glimpse of something etched into the door, a symbol barely larger than a coin, a bird, wings outstretched, wreathed in fire. He followed from a distance, ducking into alleyways and doorways when needed. The carriages passed through a side gate, guarded by soldiers who barely glanced at the occupants. A figure stepped out, to greet them, tall, solidly built, wearing a dark coat. The beard made him unmistakable. Secretary Edwin Stanton. Elias checked his watch. 17 p.m. The next day, Washington exploded with joy. News of General Lee's surrender at Appomattox Courthouse had broken in the early hours. The war was finally over. Crowds filled Pennsylvania Avenue. Union flags waved from balconies. Soldiers embraced strangers. Someone handed Elias a glass of champagne as he walked through the crowd. He barely noticed it. Underneath the joy, he could feel it. That quiet tension, like something held back just beneath the surface. That evening, he kept his appointment. At exactly midnight, Elias stood across from the Treasury building, hat pulled low, coat collar turned up against the cold. A thin mist had settled over the street, softening the edges of the lamplight. Then the carriages came, not the polished coaches of cabinet officials, but private vehicles, old but well-maintained, windows covered. One by one, they stopped at the rear service entrance. One by one, men stepped out, faces hidden in shadow, but Elias recognized some of them by profile or posture. A Supreme Court justice, 2 generals, a banker he'd seen once in a Senate gallery, and, God help him, Vice President Andrew Johnson. He wrote each one down, hands steady, breath slow. Then a smaller carriage pulled up, humble, quiet. A single occupant stepped out. Elias's stomach turned cold. It was a man he'd seen before, but not in Washington, not in any official meeting or public function. The man wore the same Phoenix insignia Simmons had described, bold this time, pinned to his lapel. He didn't look back, didn't pause, just stepped through the door and disappeared into the Treasury building. Elias closed his notebook, heart pounding like a war drum. Something was happening. Something that hadn't ended with the war, and whatever it was, it had just begun. Elias pressed deeper into the shadows as the carriage came to a halt. When the door opened and the man stepped out, Elias's breath caught in his throat. Even in the hazy flicker of the gaslight, he knew that face. Senator Lafayette Baker, head of the National Detective Police, Lincoln's personal spy master. The man moved like someone always half expecting an ambush, scanning the darkness with sharp, calculating eyes. For a moment, he seemed to look right at Elias, and the reporter's heart hammered. Then Baker turned, adjusted the front of his coat, and stepped briskly into the townhouse. On his lapel gleamed a small pin, a phoenix rising from flames. Elias squinted, committing every detail to memory. Then he waited. 3 long hours passed. The cold gnawed at him. Every passing horse or creaking shutter set his nerves on edge. He stayed hidden, teeth chattering, mind racing. When Baker and the others finally emerged, their faces were tense, drawn tight with some unspoken weight. They didn't speak. They didn't linger. They each went in different directions like agents, leaving a battlefield. Something had happened in that room. Something Elias knew would never see the light of a public record. Back at his modest boarding house, Elias didn't even remove his coat. He shoved his lamp closer, his fingers numb but moving fast, connecting pieces, scribbling theories. His notebook filled with frenzied handwriting, names, arrows, questions. At the center, he sketched the phoenix symbol, rough but recognizable. Under it, he wrote carefully, "The Order of the Phoenix? Secret society or covert military faction?" The question haunted him. Outside, dawn was creeping in, soft and grey. Church bells started ringing. A sound that had carried grief for so long now chimed with joy. The war was over. Peace was here. That's what they said. Elias barely noticed. He sat frozen as the morning papers hit the streets. Through his window, he heard a newsboy shout, "Victory complete. President Lincoln to attend Ford's Theatre. Tomorrow night." That sent a shiver through him. Simmons's words from a week ago echoed in his head. Something big is coming. Be ready. He turned to the pile of notes beside him. Stanton's name appeared more than once. So did Baker's, and that Phoenix emblem. And now, Ford's Theatre. Something was coming. All right. Elias felt it like a storm pressing against his skin. He didn't know exactly what, but he had to be there. He couldn't explain it, not even to himself, but he had to be there tomorrow night. April 14th dawned bright, unnaturally calm, a Good Friday. Sunlight poured over the city, golden and soft. It felt like a new beginning, the kind that made people believe again. Flags flew high, draped from windows and rooftops. Children laughed in the streets. Church bells rang all morning, this time in celebration, not mourning. Elias, however, felt none of it. He moved through the city like a ghost, visiting old contacts, an editor here, a printer there, a few backroom barkeeps who knew how to hear what wasn't said. At each stop, he asked the same thing. Ever heard of something called the Order of the Phoenix? Most just stared at him blankly. Others went quiet, glancing around the room before changing the subject. No one said a word, but the silence said everything. By late afternoon, Elias had a theatre ticket in his coat pocket. Our American cousin wouldn't be his first choice of entertainment, but Lincoln's presence meant the theatre would be the most important place in Washington tonight. If Elias was right, if even one of his fears was true, he needed to be inside. The sun dipped low, painting the sky with streaks of purple and orange. Elias dressed carefully. No rumpled shirt or ink-stained sleeves tonight. He wore a pressed black suit, clean white shirt, a modest cravat. Not flashy, not poor. He needed to blend in. In an inner pocket, he tucked his leather notebook. Just behind it, he slid in a small revolver. He stared at the weapon for a long second before slipping it in. He'd never carried one before, but tonight felt different. Ford's Theatre glowed ahead of him, lit up like a beacon. The old brick building on 10th Street, once a church, had become the city's cultural gem. That night, it was more than a theatre. It was the heart of a celebrating nation. Elias paused across the street, watching. People flowed inside in fine coats and bright dresses. Laughter carried on the air. There was music drifting faintly from inside. But something felt wrong. Security was light, too light. Just a few city officers chatting at the corners. No Union soldiers, no crowd control. Even for a theatre night, it was casual. Too casual, considering the president was scheduled to arrive. Elias scanned faces as he moved through the entrance. Lawmakers, military brass, wealthy widows, newspaper men, all smiling, laughing, intoxicated by peace. Everyone wanted to be part of the night. Lincoln smiled again. Inside the lobby, Elias's eye caught on a familiar face. John Parker, Lincoln's assigned bodyguard. He was leaning against a pillar, eyes drifting toward the saloon across the street, where laughter and clinking glasses spilled through the doors. Parker's uniform looked wrinkled. He wasn't paying. Attention! Elias's stomach turned. He climbed to the dress circle, one tier below the presidential box. From there, he had a perfect line of sight, both to the stage and to the door that led to Lincoln's private balcony. The theater buzzed around him. Silk dresses swished as ladies settled in. Men whispered politics between laughs. The smell of perfume and cigar smoke floated through the warm air. At exactly 8:30 p.m., the orchestra struck up Hail to the Chief. The theater shifted. People rose to their feet, clapping and cheering. A ripple of excitement passed through the room. Abraham Lincoln entered slowly, tall and weary, but smiling faintly. His black suit hung loosely on his frame. His wife Mary clung to his arm, her eyes bright. Behind them followed Major Henry Rathbone and his fiancée, Clara Harris. Elias held his breath. His eyes flicked to the crowd, to the hallway behind the box, to the shadows in the corners. He didn't know what he was looking for, but he knew this night wasn't what it seemed. And somewhere, behind the cheerful music and polished performances, something else had taken the stage. The audience rose in thunderous applause as President Lincoln entered, the orchestra swelling with Hail to the Chief. Lincoln gave a modest bow, his face worn and pale, but a faint, familiar smile touched his lips. There was something infinitely human in that expression, tired, touched, and quietly enduring. As the play resumed and the crowd settled, Elias leaned forward in his seat. He tried to focus on the farcical antics unfolding on stage, but his mind, he was split. His eyes darted constantly, watching the crowd, the shadows near the stairwells, the doors. Something was off. He could feel it in his bones. About 20 minutes into the performance, he caught a movement to his left. A man in a dark coat entered the dress circle. His steps were too assured, too fluid, like someone who knew the building intimately. Even before Elias got a good look at his face, he knew John Wilkes Booth. There was no mistaking him. Handsome, striking, the kind of face meant for the spotlight. The way he carried himself, like he was always mid-performance, gave him away even more than his chiseled profile. But it wasn't Booth alone that caught Elias's attention. Near the back wall, a Union officer, staff colonel by his insignia, intercepted Booth briefly. Elias tensed. The two spoke quickly. Low voices, sharp glances. The officer pressed something into Booth's hand, small enough to vanish instantly into his coat pocket. It was over in 10 seconds. The officer turned and walked calmly toward the stairwell. Booth didn't hesitate long either. He moved purposefully toward the hall leading to the president's box. Elias stood slowly, breath catching in his throat. He meant to follow the officer, but then he saw it. A flash of metal on the colonel's collar. Even from across the theater, Elias recognized the shape. The phoenix. The same emblem he'd seen days ago on Senator Baker's lapel. His stomach turned cold. Booth had reached the hallway outside Lincoln's box. He paused. There was no guard. John Parker, the man assigned to protect the president, was gone. Booth checked the corridor, then slipped inside. Elias opened his mouth, but no sound came. Then, the shot. A single crack of a pistol shattered the illusion of the stage, slicing through the air like lightning. Mary Lincoln's scream pierced the silence. The whole theater froze. Booth exploded back into view, leaping from the presidential box to the stage below. His foot snagged in the Treasury Guard flag draped over the railing. He landed awkwardly, stumbled, but still managed to rise, brandishing a dagger above his head. Sic semper tyrannis, he shouted, thus always to tyrants. Gasps turned into screams. The theater erupted into chaos. Elias saw it all, saw Lincoln slump in his chair, unmoving, a dark red stain blooming across the back of his collar. Mary Lincoln clutched her husband, sobbing. Major Rathbone wrestled to his feet, bleeding from where Booth had slashed him. People screamed. Some ducked beneath their seats. Others rushed for the exits. A woman fainted 2 rows behind Elias. Someone shouted, "The president's been shot," and yet Even amid the panic, Elias's reporter's instincts locked in. He didn't run. He watched. He saw Booth vanish through the back of the stage, where a horse was already waiting for him, ready, saddled, held loosely by a stable boy who looked too stunned to move. The guards, those who should have been chasing Booth, hesitated, looked confused, and then Elias saw him again. The colonel, the one with the phoenix pin. He wasn't moving to stop Booth. He wasn't even drawing a weapon. He was watching, quietly, calmly. And then, without a word, he turned and slipped out a side exit. Not toward the alley, away from it. Elias shoved through the crowd, pushing past frantic theatre-goers. People were crying, shouting, trying to climb over one another. He kept moving, heart pounding. He had to catch the officer. He burst through the side door into the night. The alley behind the theatre was dim, lit only by a nearby gas lamp. The Vernas colonel was nowhere in sight. Instead, a stagehand stood trembling, gripping the wall like it might collapse without him. "Booth!" he cried, talking to no one in particular. "It was Booth! I saw his face. John Wilkes Booth!" Elias grabbed the man's shoulder. "The officer, did you see him? The one Booth spoke to backstage. Where did he go?" The stagehand looked blank. "What officer?" "Union Colonel. Just now. He passed through here. Tall, brass buttons, phoenix on the collar." The man shook his head. "No, sir. I swear it was just Booth. He ran out like a demon was chasing him. But I didn't see no other man." Elias turned in a slow circle, eyes scanning every corner, every doorway. Nothing. The colonel was gone, like smoke in the night. Behind him, the theatre roared with chaos. A doctor was being called. Someone else shouted for soldiers. Lights were being lit. Men were running. Horses were arriving. The panic was spreading like fire. Elias backed away into the shadows, blending with the growing crowd now spilling onto 10th Street. His thoughts spiraled. Booth had pulled the trigger, but the missing guard, the officer with the phoenix insignia, the coordinated escape, the hesitation of the soldiers. The item passed from hand to hand. It didn't fit the narrative of a lone fanatic. It felt orchestrated, controlled. A plan. By midnight, the city was unrecognizable. Troops lined the streets. Horses clattered on cobblestones. Lanterns flickered in windows where people stood sleepless, whispering rumors. Outside the Peterson house, just across the street from the theatre, crowds pressed in, hushed and horrified. Inside, doctors worked desperately. Lincoln was dying, and elsewhere, word spread of something even more chilling. The vice president, he'd been attacked too. Secretary Seward had been stabbed in his bed. The streets of Washington were in chaos. Whispers of Confederate sympathizers spreading unrest swept through the crowd like wildfire. Elias Finch pushed his way through the tightly packed bodies. Soldiers, civilians, reporters, all buzzing with tension and grief. He moved with practiced, calm, listening for clues, watching who came and went from the Peterson house, where President Lincoln lay dying. Just before 1 a.m., he saw Secretary Stanton arrive. The man's face was tight with rage. His jaw clenched so hard the muscles twitched. He didn't say a word, just pushed through the throng like a man with fire in his veins. Elias's eyes caught someone trailing behind Stanton, a colonel, the same man he had seen at Ford's Theatre earlier that night. Only now, the colonel wasn't hiding his allegiance. A phoenix insignia gleamed boldly on his uniform, polished and deliberate, like it belonged there. Their eyes met across the street. The colonel's stare was icy and calculating, the kind of look that didn't need words to deliver a threat. Elias felt it sink into his chest like a stone. Then the colonel turned and followed Stanton into the house, vanishing behind the door where the president's life was slipping away and the future of the nation hung in the balance. By dawn, President Lincoln had succumbed to his wound. Elias stood among the crowd as the bells began to toll. slow, mournful notes echoing through the early morning haze. His notebook was filled with scribbled observations, details that didn't align with the story officials were already pushing to the public. While others wept, he slipped away down a side street, his mind racing. One thing was certain. What he'd seen at Ford's Theatre wasn't the random act of a crazed Southern loyalist. It was deliberate, calculated, a move in a deeper, darker game. By noon on April 15th, the city had changed. Black crepe hung from balconies and windows. Church bells rang on every corner. Women wept openly as they walked arm in arm. Men stood like statues outside newspaper offices, reading and rereading the hastily printed bulletins posted on the walls. Elias moved through this quiet storm like a ghost, detached, watching, thinking. His instincts as a journalist wouldn't let him grieve yet. He noticed what others didn't. Small cracks in the story already being cemented as truth. The papers painted Booth as a lone fanatic, a Southern sympathizer seeking revenge. But there was no mention of the officer Elias had seen speaking with Booth before the shooting. No curiosity about the inexplicable absence of Lincoln's guard. No one questioned how Booth had accessed the president's box so easily. It was all too clean, too fast. The story had locked into place before the president's body had even cooled. Elias turned down a narrow alley to a printing shop tucked behind East Street. The small place was run by Heinrich Müller, a German immigrant who had printed The Honest Witness for Elias throughout the war. He was trustworthy, quiet, and brave, but when Elias stepped inside, Müller didn't greet him with his usual nod. His face was pale, drawn tight with worry. "I cannot print for you anymore, Herr Finch," Müller said before Elias could open his mouth. Elias froze. "What? Why not? What happened?" "Men came this morning," Müller whispered, glancing toward the curtained windows. "Government men." "What men? What did they want?" Müller busied his hands rearranging type that didn't need rearranging. "They asked about you, about your pamphlets. They took my customer ledger." Elias's throat tightened. "Did they threaten you?" "They didn't have to," Müller said quietly. One of them looked around and said, "The country needs unity now, not troublemakers." Then he put his hand on my press, my machine, and said, "Beautiful machine. Shame if something happened to it. Or to your immigration papers." Anger flared in Elias's chest. "I need to publish what I saw, Heinrich. The truth about Ford's Theatre. People deserve to know." Müller pressed a small brass key into Elias's palm. "Back room of Kennedy's tobacco shop. My brother used to print from there. The press is old, but it works. It's yours." Their eyes met. Müller's were filled with fear. "But Finch," he said, his voice low and urgent, "be careful. These are dangerous times to question powerful men." Elias nodded once and left without another word. By late afternoon, he was hunched over the dusty press in the back of Kennedy's shop. The air smelled of stale smoke and ink. The old press was noisy but functional. Elias sorted his notes with shaking fingers, ready to write, when he heard a knock. His hand slid quietly to the revolver in his coat pocket. Then a woman's voice came through the door, soft, hesitant. "Mr. Finch, it's Adelaide Booker. I was at Ford's last night." He paused, then carefully unlocked the door. Adelaide Booker stepped inside. She was in her early 40s, with sharp eyes and a seamstress's calm demeanor. She'd worked at the theatre for years, and Elias had spoken to her a few times while researching wartime entertainment. Tonight, though, she didn't waste words. "I saw you," she said quietly. "Following that officer." Elias nodded slowly, tension curling in his gut. "And I saw him too," she said. "He was backstage earlier, talking to Booth, not arguing, talking, calm, like they'd planned something." She looked over her shoulder as if the walls might be listening. "They want to bury this, Mr. Finch. They want Booth to be the only name anyone remembers. But there were others. Important ones. Elias stared at her, heart pounding. He knew he wasn't imagining things now. He wasn't alone. Someone else had seen it too. Are you willing to testify? He asked. Her eyes narrowed. I'm willing to be careful, she said. But I'll help you, however I can. Just promise me you'll print the truth, all of it, before they make it disappear. Elias looked down at his scattered pages. The ink, the press, the story. I promise, he said. The one with the strange pin, she said, voice trembling. Elias felt his pulse quicken. Tell me exactly what you saw. Adelaide took a breath, steadying herself. I was backstage, mending the left curtain. Mr. Booth came in early. He looked anxious, kept glancing at his pocket watch, pacing. Then the officer entered through the stage door. That alone is odd, Elias said. The stage door's not for them. I know, she whispered. That's why I noticed. He wasn't trying to hide, but he wasn't announcing himself either. They spoke, just for a moment. The officer handed Booth something. Small, metal, maybe brass. I only caught part of what he said. What did he say? She looked around, as if the walls might be listening. He leaned in close and said, Remember, wait for the laugh line, Act 3, Scene 2, not before. Then he left. Same way. He came in. Elias's throat felt tight. Could you recognize that officer if you saw him again? She nodded. Colonel Atticus Wade. He's been to the theatre before, always asking about seating charts. Who sits where? Studying the boxes. Like it was a map, she clutched her shawl tighter around her shoulders. I shouldn't have come. My sister says men are asking questions about all of us who were there that night, asking what we saw, who we talked to. You did the right thing, Elias said. But be careful. Don't speak to anyone else. Not yet. After Adelaide left, Elias worked without pause. He wrote furiously, his pen flying across the pages, laying out everything he'd seen with cold precision. Adelaide's testimony fit the strange pattern he was already tracking. The gaps, the ease of access, the rehearsed silence. By midnight, he had printed 200 copies of a broadsheet titled, simply, Questions about Ford's Theatre. The ink was barely dry when he stepped into the dark alley behind Kennedy's tobacco shop. The stack of pamphlets wrapped tightly in twine beneath his arm. Shape moved from the shadows. Elias froze, one hand slipping toward the revolver hidden in his coat. Don't, Finch, came a low voice. There are 3 rifles aimed at you right now. Colonel Simmons stepped into the gaslight, calm and composed. His uniform was pristine. His eyes, unreadable. You knew something was coming, Elias said, voice taut. Back at the Capitol. You warned me. I suspected, Simmons replied, shrugging slightly. That's different from knowing. He glanced at the bundle under Elias's arm. Those pamphlets won't make it past sunrise. The city's sealed tight. Soldiers on every street corner. Stanton put it into effect an hour ago. Martial law. Since... When do you support silencing the truth? Elias asked. Simmons exhaled slowly, his tone almost weary. Since the cost of speaking it outweighs the benefit, the official line is that Booth acted with Confederate loyalists. Anyone pushing another story is sowing discord, undermining the Union in its hour of grief. Elias's voice hardened. You're part of it. The Order of the Phoenix. Simmons's. Expression twitched, barely, but it was there. That name, he said quietly, is not to be spoken aloud. Not now. Not ever. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Listen to me, Finch. What happened last night? It wasn't chaos. It was design. Lincoln was never going to be the man to finish this war the way it needs to end. Too merciful, too willing to forgive. The South needs to be crushed, not reconciled. And Booth? Elias asked. You used him. Simmons didn't deny it. He was useful, passionate, easy to steer. He believed he was striking a blow for the Confederacy. But in truth, he served a larger vision, A new union, forged in certainty, not softness. Simmons looked almost regretful. The country needed a villain. Booth gave us one. Now, the real work begins. Elias narrowed his eyes. Stanton? Wade? Baker? How far does it go? Instead of answering, Simmons reached into his coat and handed him a small folded sheet of paper. This was left for you. I suggest you burn it after reading. Then he turned, and just like that, he was gone, swallowed by the dark. Elias unfolded the note under the street lamp's flickering glow. Elegant, flowing script covered the page. The phoenix rises from necessary fire. What seems an ending is merely transformation. Those who see too clearly become blinded. EF, choose wisely where blindness falls. April 16th, midnight, Congressional Cemetery, Hamilton plot. Rain began to patter on the alley stones. When Elias looked up, the alley was empty, silent except for a stray dog rustling through trash. He returned to his lodgings to find the door ajar. Inside, everything had been turned over, quietly, methodically. His desk papers shuffled, the floorboards pried loose, mattress sliced open. No noise, no mess, just cold precision. His latest notes were missing. On the desk sat a single newspaper, folded neatly, open to a short article. Adelaide Booker, seamstress at Ford's Theatre, tragically took her own life this evening. Sources say she was overcome with grief after witnessing the assassination of President Lincoln. Elias's breath caught. Cold sweat bloomed down his back. Adelaide had been fine just hours earlier. Focused, afraid, yes, but clear-eyed, determined. They'd gotten to her. Her death wasn't grief. It was a message. Witnesses could disappear just like words on a page. For the next 24 hours, Elias kept his head down. He moved like a hunted man through a city wrapped in silence and mourning. Military checkpoints sprang up overnight. Men in plain clothes, stiff with purpose, lingered on corners, eyes always watching. The newspapers all ran identical headlines, identical stories. Booth, the lone madman, a Confederate plot, Lincoln the martyr. It was as if they'd all been handed the same script. Booth was now the most hunted man in America. But to Elias Finch, something about the search felt off. There was noise, yes, dozens of patrols, headlines, rewards, but real progress, none. It felt like a performance, a theatre of urgency masking quiet intentions. On the evening of April 16th, the sky grew heavy and sullen, thick with clouds that threatened a storm. As the first drops began to fall, Elias moved quickly and quietly through the dark streets toward Congressional Cemetery. The Hamilton plot wasn't hard to find. An ornate marble obelisk stood out, almost arrogant in its grandeur, marking the grave of a long-forgotten congressman. By midnight, Elias, crouched in the shadows behind a weather-worn mausoleum, the cold stone at his back felt like ice. His revolver rested in his palm, slick with sweat despite the chill in the air. Then he heard it, the muffled clatter of hooves on wet cobblestone. A lone carriage pulled up, elegant and dark. The door creaked open, and a tall man stepped out, carrying a lantern. Even in the downpour, Elias recognized him instantly. Broad shoulders, heavy moustache, sharp eyes that cut through the gloom. Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, the second most powerful man in the nation. Some whispered he was the one truly in charge now, with President Johnson stumbling to fill Lincoln's shoes. "Mr. Finch," Stanton called, his voice crisp and calm, despite the rain. "I know you're here. Let's skip the dramatics. If I wanted, you dead. You already would be." Elias stepped into the lantern's faint glow, heart pounding. "Like Adelaide Booker?" he asked, voice low. Stanton didn't flinch. "Regrettable," he said, "but necessary. Some people can't adapt when the world changes." You, I believe, are more pragmatic. Elias stared at him, eyes narrowing. Is that what this is? You're here to buy me off? No, Stanton said. I'm here to offer perspective. He set the lantern on a nearby headstone and turned to face Elias directly, rain sliding down his face, his coat already soaked. What do you think you know, Mr. Finch? I know Lincoln was murdered by more than just a lunatic with a grudge. I know there's something called the Order of the Phoenix behind it, and I know you're part of it. Stanton nodded slowly, thoughtfully. Not inaccurate, he said, but incomplete. The Phoenix isn't some hidden cabal of madmen craving power. We are patriots. We believe that sometimes to save the body, you must cut out the disease. Lincoln. Was the disease? Elias asked, a sick churn starting in his gut. Stanton's expression shifted slightly. Regret. Or just calculation? He was a good man. Too good. His compassion would have undone everything we fought for. His plan, with malice toward none, would have let the Southern elite rise again. They'd reclaim Congress in 10 years, and the war would have meant nothing. So you had him killed. We had him removed, Stanton corrected, stepping closer. For the greater good. Now, reconstruction can happen the way it needs to. With discipline. With clarity. Elias said nothing, his jaw tightening. You're a writer, Mr. Finch. A man who understands how the pen shapes memory. History belongs to those who write it. You want me to be your propagandist. I want you to be realistic. The country doesn't need truth right now. It needs unity. Stanton reached into his coat and pulled out a leather portfolio, setting it gently atop the grave marker. Inside is your commission, special correspondent to the War Department. There's also evidence. Enough to suggest you've been working with us from the beginning. You're framing me? I'm giving you a choice, Stanton said, stepping back toward his carriage. Help us tell the story the country needs, or be erased from the story altogether. He paused before stepping inside, turning once more toward Elias. One day the truth will come out, maybe when the fire cools, but not today, not for decades. The rain was falling hard now, hammering the stones around them, drowning out all but his final words. Choose wisely, Mr. Finch. By tomorrow, your fate will be decided, with or without you. And then he was gone. For the next 3 days, the rain didn't stop. It fell on Washington like grief, heavy and relentless, as if the sky itself mourned Lincoln. Elias disappeared. He drifted between hidden apartments and dim cellars, safe houses only known to the informants and underground allies he had built trust with during the war. The portfolio remained sealed in his coat pocket, unopened, like a box of rot waiting to spill out. He could feel it against his side like a hot coal. On the third night, lightning cracked the sky in jagged veins as Elias slipped into the damp basement of a church. The minister upstairs had once treated Confederate soldiers in secret. Now he turned a blind eye to the strangers in his cellar. Miller was already there, wringing rain from his coat, his glasses fogged from the storm. The papers say Booth is headed south, he said in a low voice, pulling out a soaked handkerchief to wipe his face. But I heard from my cousin. He drives supply carts for the army. Said soldiers raided the Surratt boarding house again today. Again? Elias asked. Miller nodded. Tore up floorboards, knocked down walls. They're desperate. Elias leaned against a stone pillar, mind racing. They think Booth left something behind. Both men sat in silence as thunder cracked above them. The portfolio still burned like a brand inside Elias's coat, heavier now, not with weight, but with implication. What Booth left behind might have been a clue, but what Elias carried might rewrite history. Or something they planted, Elias murmured, and now they need to retrieve. Miller hesitated, glanced around the damp cellar as if afraid the shadows might be listening. There are rumors about a diary. Elias's eyes snapped to him. Booth kept a diary? So they say, Miller said, lowering his voice. A small red leather book. He wrote in it constantly, His thoughts, his plans, the kind of thing that might list names, people he spoke with, people who gave him orders. Elias leaned forward, heart picking up speed, his instincts sharpened, like they always did when something big loomed just out of reach. "Who told you?" "A clerk at the War Department," Miller said. "He was drunk, loose-lipped at Hannigan's Tavern 2 nights ago," said Stanton himself ordered. Another full sweep of the boarding house. Every floorboard, every brick. Elias raised an eyebrow. "That's a sudden burst of interest." Miller nodded. Said Stanton looked like he'd seen a ghost when he gave the order. The implications clicked into place with an almost audible snap. If Booth had documented his contacts, names like Stanton, Lafayette Baker, or Senator Wade, anything tying them to the Order of the Phoenix, the entire lone gunman narrative would fall apart like wet paper. This diary could rip the mask off everything. Elias stood abruptly. "I need to get into the Surratt boarding house." "Impossible," Miller said, alarmed. "It's guarded around the clock. Soldiers at every entrance. You wouldn't make it 5 feet." "Nothing is impossible," Elias said, pulling on his coat. "Only inconvenient." He hadn't spent years navigating Washington's dark corners, cultivating informants, and tracing forgotten routes through the Capitol just to be told no. He knew ways into buildings that didn't involve doors. "Are the old tunnel entrances still accessible?" he asked. Miller blinked. "You mean the smuggling tunnels?" "Exactly. Some maybe, but most haven't been used since the early days of the war. They're probably collapsed or sealed off by now." "Some isn't none," Elias said. Beneath Washington's surface lay a forgotten geography, tunnels built for moving contraband, information, even fugitives during the war, especially around the Navy Yard and riverfront. Elias had explored them years ago, researching a story that had never seen print. But the maps, the paths, they were burned into his memory. That night, lantern in one hand and notebook in the other, Elias descended into the city's underbelly. The entrance was tucked behind a false wall in an abandoned warehouse, long left to rot. He forced the rusted iron door open, hinges groaning in protest. The tunnel beyond breathed stale air and ancient damp. Mold coated the bricks. Water dripped, somewhere far off, echoing like slow footsteps. Elias moved forward, counting steps, cross-referencing the crude map in his book. His lantern threw flickering shadows across the tunnel walls, warped, hunched figures that danced and vanished as he passed. Cobwebs clung to his coat. Rats skittered in the darkness behind him. Nearly an hour in, Elias stopped. By his calculations, he should be directly beneath H Street, near the foundation of the Surratt boarding house. A rusted ladder clung to the brick wall ahead, bolted and slick with condensation. He climbed slowly, silently. At the top, he pushed up into a small, forgotten storage cellar. The air was thick with dust. Boxes of coal, broken furniture, and discarded tools cluttered the room, all undisturbed, except for one thing. Boot prints, a single set, fresh. They led to the far wall and stopped. Elias knelt, examining the bricks. One section had a faint discoloration, the mortar slightly newer than the rest. His fingers moved automatically, pulling out his pocket knife and scraping. The mortar flaked away, revealing a loosened brick. He slid it free. Inside, wrapped in a scrap of burlap, was leather. His breath caught. A red book, small, unmarked. He pulled it out carefully, heart pounding, and flipped it open. Pages, filled. In a dramatic, looping script. Flourishes. Theatrical confidence. Elias recognized the hand. Booth's. He tucked it into his coat and retraced his path through the tunnels, moving faster this time, the thrill of discovery pushing him forward. Back in the church cellar, Muller stared wide-eyed as Elias sat, the diary down on the table between them. Elias lit the lamp and opened it again, now with trembling fingers. It wasn't what he expected. There were no clean diagrams of a conspiracy, no smoking gun manifest of names and places. Instead, the pages spilled the mind of a man lost in delusions of grandeur. Booth compared himself to Brutus. He wrote of divine purpose, of avenging the South, of being history's chosen hand. But scattered among the self-congratulatory ramblings were flashes of something darker, something real. A March entry caught Elias's eye. Met with W again. He assures me that once it is done, I will be hailed as a hero throughout the South. Arrangements have been made for my escape. I am to follow the route exactly as planned, making contact at each designated safe house until I reach safety in Virginia. W. Wade, or someone else. Elias made a mental note. Then he found something more disturbing. An entry from early April, the ink smudged by what looked like water or sweat. The order has guaranteed my place in history. The words sat on the page like poison. Elias looked up at Muller, who was reading over his shoulder now, silent. This isn't just a madman's journal, Elias whispered. It's evidence of a structure, a chain. And Booth wasn't acting alone. Muller exhaled slowly, eyes locked on the page. And if that's in here, how much worse could the rest of it be? Their influence reached places few dared whisper about, into the very top tiers of government, the kind of names that would never be spoken aloud, let alone written down. They preached about a new America, one reborn in fire and blood. A nation purified, a nation led by so-called true patriots who would drag it toward its rightful destiny. I was just a tool in their plan, a pawn who believed he was making history. But one diary entry shook me more than the rest. Dated April 13th, just one day before the assassination, it read, "Final meeting with CW." He brought the Derringer and confirmed the timing. Act 3, Scene 2. During the laugh line. The noise will cover the shot. The guard won't be there. It's been arranged. I raised concerns about escaping through the theatre. CW assured me the doors I need will be clear. He gave me a token. Small. Bronze. A phoenix rising from flames. Elias read that line again and again, long into the early hours. The diary didn't come out and name the order of the phoenix, but its fingerprints were everywhere. The planning, the timing, the way everything fell perfectly into place. Booth hadn't acted alone. That much was now chillingly clear. There were collaborators embedded across Ford's theatre and scattered along the escape route, people stationed and waiting, just as rehearsed. But the more Elias read, the more questions tangled in his mind. Who was CW? Could it be Colonel Wade? And what about the shadowy figures Booth hinted at? Those unnamed power brokers hiding behind veils of patriotism. Secretary of War, Edwin Stanton, was an obvious suspect. But the diary hinted at something far bigger. Deep banking interests that had profited off the Civil War. European agents worried about Lincoln's Reconstruction plans. Even extremist Republicans, who thought Lincoln had gone soft. Fueled by Booth's own words, Elias began writing The Murder of the Republic. It would be his most dangerous work yet. For 3 straight days, he barely slept, surrounded by stacks of notes and the stale smell of ink. He wrote in the back room of a sympathetic bookseller's shop, where the lamps burned all night. Piece by piece, he pulled together names, motives, movements. He linked Booth's diary with odd inconsistencies he'd seen firsthand. Strange delays, missing guards, veiled remarks from officials after the president's death. He named names. Stanton, at the core. Colonel Atticus Wade, the military hammer. Lafayette Baker, directing the flow of information with his secretive National Detective Police. Elias even singled out 3 cabinet members, their sudden policy shifts after the assassination too abrupt to ignore. On April 24th, just as the first copies of the pamphlet rolled off the press, news broke like thunder. Booth had been found in a tobacco barn in Virginia, dead, shot by a soldier who had, according to official statements, disobeyed direct orders to bring Booth in alive. It was too perfect, too convenient. Elias stayed up all night, rewriting the end of his pamphlet. He added a final section, detailing the strange circumstances around Booth's death. The barn surrounded, the fire, the single shot, the witness silenced forever. A man, worth more alive than dead, killed on the spot. As the sun crept over the rooftops on April 25th, 200 copies of The Murder of the Republic lay stacked on a table, their ink barely dry. Elias stood over them, exhausted, heart pounding. This was it. The truth was ready. He never got the chance to release them. Just after sunrise, the door exploded inward. Wood splintered across the floor. 6 men rushed in, plain clothes, but military in every movement. No uniforms, no badges. But Elias recognized one of them instantly. Lafayette Baker, the man who claimed to lead the manhunt for Booth, the man Elias had named. Elias Finch, Baker said coldly, stepping forward. With a drawn pistol. You're under arrest for sedition and interference with a military investigation. Elias had expected this moment. He had even packed a bag the night before. But when it came, the fear hit him like a gut punch. Under whose authority? Elias asked, voice tight. There's no martial law, the war's over. Baker smiled thinly, like someone who had already won. Special wartime powers, he said. Extended by executive order after the president's assassination. The paperwork doesn't matter. You're coming with us. False Skies tells the story of another kind of betrayal. In this modern conspiracy thriller, the world's worst terror attack wasn't just anticipated, it was orchestrated. Not by foreign enemies, but by people deep within the government, feeding a war machine that thrived on fear. For decades, the truth stayed buried, until Thomas Keane, a quiet former FBI data analyst, stumbled upon the wrong files, or the right ones, depending on how you see it. What he found would tear open wounds long thought sealed and expose a monstrous deception. That endless war, the erosion of civil liberties, and the rise of an untouchable military-industrial complex weren't collateral damage. They were the goal. Pursued by a nameless agency that lived between redacted lines and classified briefings, Thomas Keane ran, not for glory, not even for justice, but to make the truth louder than the lie. The official narrative had to stay sealed, they believed, not just for stability, but to keep the machinery of fear profitable. Keane knew that all too well. He was running out of time. The world was still reeling from the first wave of revelations, and more were coming. If your eyes grow heavy as you read this, that's okay. The story is slow burning by design, thick with detail. You might drift into sleep thinking about how terror can be repackaged as patriotism, or you might stay hooked, unraveling the plot thread by thread, heart pounding until the final period. Either way, when you reach the end, I hope you've seen something clearly. Once power settles into the dark, it does not surrender easily. Shall we begin? Take a breath. Let the room fall silent. Imagine the soft green glow of outdated monitors, the whisper of manila folders sliding shut, and somewhere, on a desk long forgotten, a page so damning it had to disappear. This is False Skies, told in 5 parts, each one a step deeper into a maze of betrayal. Listen carefully. The loudest lies often hide in the quietest corners of history. Thomas Keane didn't see himself as a hero when he pressed send. He was just a man buckling under guilt. A decade in the FBI's data analytics division had taught him where the skeletons were buried and which ones were still twitching. For years, he held onto a flash drive labeled Black Dust, the name innocuous, the contents anything but. Inside were hundreds of classified memos, shipping ledgers, internal emails, and intelligence briefings, evidence that suggested the worst terrorist attack in modern history had been not just foreseen, but engineered. It was early morning. Overcast. Fitting, Keane thought, for the end of the world he'd known. He sat in a run-down motel off a forgotten highway, the wallpaper peeled like old paint. The air reeked of burnt coffee and mildew. His laptop, battered from years of service, teetered on a lopsided table. A small green light blinked steadily. The secure connection was live. His heart thudded like it wanted to escape his chest. He hovered over the upload button, then typed a simple note for the dead and the misled, and then send. The file left the motel room like a ghost through the walls. Within the hour, black dust landed in the inboxes of select journalists and at the digital doorstep of a controversial global outlet known for publishing government secrets. The editors pored over the files, verifying fragments against known documents. What they saw made them fall silent. By day's end, headlines emerged, timid at first, unverified. Files, allegedly, link intelligence community to pre-attack planning. Cautious, sanitized. But still, the signal had pierced the noise. Mainstream news dismissed it. Likely fabricated, said one anchor. Possibly AI-generated nonsense, said another. Government spokespeople called it foreign disinformation. And yet, something didn't sit right. The documents felt too aligned to be hoaxes. Among them, a series of internal memos written months before the attack. One line chilled Elias when he read it. We require a catalytic event, unifying, traumatic, irreversible. Only then can Operation Echo move forward under public mandate. There were also logs showing that insurance policies on specific high-rise floors had mysteriously been expanded mere days before the tragedy, and a buried set of communications about a military war game scheduled for the same day, with orders, oddly timed, instructing NORAD to stand down if simulacra match live telemetry. The pieces clicked too neatly. Keane watched it all unfold on the motel's flickering CRT television. A news anchor, voice strained, reported the leak while flashing the White House's denial across the screen. His phone buzzed. Not a number he recognized. He unplugged the laptop, shoved it in a duffel bag, and stood up. The motel window rattled. In the wind. It was time to disappear. Keane had spent nearly 10 years compiling anomaly reports on that fateful day. Glitches, misplaced files, out-of-order commands. At first, they meant nothing. But patterns began to emerge. Contracts awarded. Days before the event to defense firms, spikes in stock trades, private briefings with intelligence brass. The war that followed had made some very specific people very rich. Quietly, carefully, Keane had copied everything. He hadn't planned to leak it. Not at first. But the nightmares came. The faces, the screaming, the blood, the lies. He couldn't carry it anymore. Meanwhile, the machine stirred. By nightfall, phones rang in the deepest corners of the intelligence world. Men and women with clean suits and invisible job titles started searching for a name that now screamed off their screens. Thomas Keane. They'd seen his name before, on audits, on flagged searches. He'd once raised concerns about internal inconsistencies, then quietly went back to work. But now they knew he had crossed the line. Within hours, a special operations unit, off the books and buried beneath multiple front organizations, was activated. Their orders were clear. Locate Keane, contain him, label him a domestic threat. Do not let this spread. What came next wasn't a chase. It was a hunt. And Thomas Keane, he had just begun to run. Eldridge Shaw stood alone in his office, high above the city, watching the blinking lights of the skyline like tiny flares of warning. As director of one of the government's most secretive intelligence units, he had weathered crises before. But this was different. The documents that had leaked, if they spread unchecked, could rip through the fragile post-attack calm like a grenade. He picked up the phone, his fingers steady, but his voice low. Initiate containment. All channels. By midnight, official bulletins were already circulating internally. Thomas Keane, suspected hacker and domestic threat. Agents were digging through digital trails, pulling hours of surveillance footage from every street near the FBI's main building. A few keystrokes later, Shaw was on a secure call with one of his longtime contacts at a major media conglomerate. "Bury it," he said plainly. "Until further notice." The compliance was swift. By morning, the major networks gave the leak barely a passing mention. Headlines about celebrity scandals, international disputes, and a sudden dip in oil prices dominated the front page. The public, it seemed, was supposed to forget, but the story was already alive. On social media, the hashtag Black Dust was exploding. Amateur sleuths and armchair analysts dissected every line of the leaked memos. A few experienced data scientists started digging deeper, cross-referencing IP logs from the files. What they found sent chills down their spines. Government subdomain links, timestamps that matched key events, embedded metadata that hadn't been scrubbed. If the documents were real, they pointed to something far darker than negligence. They suggested complicity. Someone inside the government not only knew about the terror attack in advance, but may have allowed, even ensured, it would cause maximum destruction for political gain. A new phrase was born from the storm: false skies. It was a metaphor spreading like wildfire, suggesting that everything people believed was a painted ceiling, an illusion placed above them to keep the real truth hidden. Within 24 hours, protests erupted outside federal buildings in several cities. Most were small, but angry. People held hand-painted signs. "We deserve truth. Stop the lies. Who painted the sky?" The official response was quick and flat. The documents were forgeries, likely foreign propaganda. But it rang hollow. By that evening, the hackers responsible posted a chilling message across anonymous forums. "If the media continues to ignore this, we will release more." They hinted at a second wave of files, even more damning than the first. On Wall Street, stocks dipped. Rumors surfaced about old insider deals involving defense contractors, names that had long been tied to both war profits and government secrets. Several companies with military ties saw their shares plummet overnight. Meanwhile, Thomas Keane was lying low in a friend's forgotten cabin deep in the woods of upstate New York. The place had no internet, no cell service, just a battery-powered radio that crackled with distant broadcasts. He sat in the quiet, listening to the static-filled news reports. His photo had made it to every major channel. The FBI had officially named him a primary suspect in a massive, classified leak. They called him a disgruntled former employee with extremist views. There was no mention of the contents of the files, only him. He leaned back, running a hand through his hair, staring at the ceiling beams. He knew how fast the system could turn on someone. It wasn't just about escaping now, it was about being erased. And yet, there were whispers in the data analyst community. People who had worked with Keane before, who knew his mind, his skill with patterns. Some were staying silent publicly, but privately they were uneasy. One of them was Sarah Voss. Once a respected, investigative journalist, Sarah had been quietly blacklisted years ago for probing too deeply into post-9/11 inconsistencies. She'd spent the last decade publishing under pseudonyms, following leads that no one else dared touch. When she saw the leaked documents, something clicked. The language, the formatting, the redacted names, all familiar. They matched pieces she'd heard about in shadowy conversations over the years, patterns she never could prove, until now. She reached out through a secure network, leaving an encrypted message on the dark-hosted site where the files first appeared. "I can verify. Let me speak to the source." It took nearly a full day for the message to reach Keane. But when it did, he recognized her name. Her old articles were part of what had first opened his eyes, back when he still worked in the bureau. He typed carefully, encrypting every line. "If you're real, prove it. We talk, we meet, but you come alone." The reply came fast. Just 3 words. "I already am." The race had begun. Could Keane trust her? Could she publish without getting swallowed up or discredited? And would the story matter if the government had already primed the public to see him as a villain? He knew the clock was ticking. Homeland Security didn't hesitate when it came to silencing threats. And now, with the world watching, even the smallest misstep could mean death, or worse, disappearance. 2 days after the leak, the country was in turmoil. News anchors read their scripts with tense smiles. Government spokespeople repeated the same rehearsed lines. But something had changed. Smaller media outlets were running in-depth comparisons. They laid the leaked files next to authentic FBI and CIA templates. Formatting matched. Timestamp protocols matched. Security clearance stamps aligned perfectly. The digital fingerprints were too precise to fake. People were split. Some were fully convinced. Others recoiled from the idea that 2 decades of war and sacrifice might have been orchestrated from within. That the nation's wounds weren't just scars, they were surgical incisions. And Keane. He wasn't just a name anymore, he was a symbol. Former mid-level data analyst who'd vanished 2 years ago after resigning from the FBI under unusual circumstances. Now he was public enemy number 1, or the first real whistleblower of the modern age. And somewhere out there, Sarah Voss was getting ready to tell his story. If she could survive long enough to publish it. Thomas Keane had always been known for his attention to detail. Quiet, precise. The kind of analyst who found patterns in noise. But long before the headlines and accusations, before his name became synonymous with betrayal, he was already raising quiet alarms. In the months leading up to 9/11, he'd flagged anomalies, reports that didn't line up, data buried too quickly. He never shouted. He documented. When nothing came of it, he started making copies. Months' worth of archived material, some destined to be sealed forever, slipped quietly onto secure drives. The day he walked out of the bureau, no one even noticed. He handed in his badge, shook hands, and disappeared from the system like he'd never been there. Now, years later, as his name lit up every news cycle, his old supervisors called him unstable. A conspiracy theorist, not worth listening to. What they didn't say, what they deliberately withheld, was that his theories had almost triggered an internal review years earlier. That was until someone upstairs shut it down. In a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside DC, a black SUV rolled to a stop in front of a modest 2-story house. It was past midnight. No lights on. 4 men in plain black suits stepped out, moving with the crisp efficiency of people who knew they didn't need permission. They knocked once, hard. When the door opened, they flashed no badges, just looks. That said, refusal wasn't an option. The man inside, a middle-aged data engineer and one of Keane's former colleagues, let them in without a word. One of the agents nodded toward the office. Computer. Now. They rifled through his emails, message logs, any references to Thomas, black dust, or anything that hinted at the leak. No warrant, no explanation, just cold, silent efficiency. When they left, they took the hard drive with them. It was the same across several households that week. Ex-bureau analysts, techs, and desk agents. Anyone who'd ever worked near Keane. The message was clear. Talking meant exposure. Exposure meant consequences. These weren't standard agents. They were watchers. An internal group buried deep within the intelligence community. Whispers tied them to something older, something darker. The Black Archive, a covert apparatus with links to corporate security, intelligence privatization, and legacy defense funding. At the top sat Eldridge, Shaw. From his glass-walled office in a newly built government tower, Shaw watched the manhunt unfold. He'd risen quickly through the ranks after the chaos of 9/11, endorsing sweeping surveillance reforms, partnering with major contractors, securing billions in long-term defense tech. Now, everything he'd built, every law, every budget, every partnership was in danger. The leaks threatened the very architecture he'd spent decades constructing. Reeve Keen. Whatever name he's using, Shaw said to his team, arms crossed behind his back. We find him. We end this. We cannot let paranoid fantasies destroy 20 years of progress. Out in the cold, drifting from one safe zone to another, Thomas Keane lived like a fugitive. He avoided highways, studied patterns, recognized federal checkposts by their subtle tells, the type of antenna, the pause in traffic flow, the agents pretending to be surveyors or tow truck drivers. He changed cars, wore hats, switched license plates, used an identity card from an old operation, just authentic enough to avoid suspicion if glanced at. He paid in cash, ate when he could, protein bars, gas station snacks. Nights were the worst, cheap motels, paid under borrowed names, each one a gamble. Every slamming door in the hallway made him flinch. Every engine in the lot might be a black SUV rolling up for him. The pressure crawled under his skin. Paranoia wasn't a delusion, it was just accurate now. Then came the message from Sarah Voss. It was short, securely sent, heavily encrypted. We need to meet. I can verify these files. People still trust me in the independent media world. We don't have much time. The window is closing. Keane stared at the screen, the cursor blinking like a slow heartbeat. He knew the risks. If they met in person, they could be tracked. But if they didn't, if the files remained in limbo, he'd be dismissed as just another name lost in the static. They needed credibility. And Sarah had it. They arranged to meet in a small coastal town in the old public library after closing. The next day, just before sunset, Keane parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot. He wore a baseball cap pulled low and kept to the shadows. As he neared the lot, his stomach tightened. An unmarked grey sedan sat quietly by the curb. Engine running. Tinted windows. Keane veered off, circled the block twice, watched the sedan. No movement. Maybe a coincidence. Maybe not. He couldn't afford certainty. Finally, he slipped inside through a side entrance. The library was quiet. Fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead. Dust hung in the air like sediment in water. Among the tall shelves, he saw her, Sarah Voss. She looked exactly like he remembered from old conference footage. Tall, sharp-featured, with tired eyes and a leather jacket that had clearly seen too many years. She didn't smile, just extended a hand. Thomas, she said softly, I believe you. The story's always had cracks. Let's finish this. Let's give them something they can't ignore. He slid into the seat across from her and pulled a small USB drive from his coat. His hands were trembling. This is the complete set, not the redacted version that went out online. These are the originals. Memos about stand-down orders, contractor, deals, modified flight paths, even emails where they refer to the hijackers as assets gone rogue. His voice broke slightly. He blinked hard. They let it happen. Or worse, they orchestrated it. For war. For power. Sarah inhaled sharply, already loading files on her laptop. She scrolled, eyes scanning entries, cross-checking names. Jesus, she whispered, pausing at an internal message chain. These bank routes, coded memos. Operation Silence, nodded. That was their name for keeping key voices quiet. There's more. Backdoor funding trails, surveillance tags, fake targets. It's all there. She leaned back, visibly shaken. Thomas, this could collapse careers, maybe entire agencies. Good, he said, staring at the dusty floor. Maybe it's time. She tapped her keyboard, her mind racing. But we can't drop this on my blog. It'll get buried, flagged as fake. They'll delete it before it spreads. We need to go big, secure channels, international media partnerships, even whistleblower groups. Something too large to shut down. She looked up. I have a plan. The plan had been simple, at least on paper. Find a mainstream journalist with enough credibility and just enough of a rebellious streak to give their story airtime. Or stage. Something so loud, so public that not even the watchers could blot it out completely. Then, without warning, a muffled commotion at the library entrance shattered the quiet. "Shit!" Sarah hissed, snapping the laptop shut. A tall figure in dark clothes hovered just beyond the glass doors, scanning the room like a hawk. His posture was rigid, alert, Keen instinctively ducked, tugging Sarah down with him behind the nearest row of dusty shelves. Footsteps, slow, deliberate. Then, the old caretaker, Mr. Granger, shuffled out from the archives, oblivious. "Oh, didn't know we had company. This late," he said cheerfully, squinting into the dim room. The figure outside hesitated, eyes locking through the glass for half a second, then vanished into the shadows. "Could have been nothing," Sarah whispered, but her voice betrayed doubt, or someone confirming we're here, Keen muttered. They didn't linger. They packed up fast, slipping out separately and agreeing to regroup in 48 hours outside a major city, where they'd attempt to breach a local news station, one of the few that hadn't yet been swallowed by corporate filters. If they could get one uncut segment on air, it might ignite something bigger, but that meant they had to move fast and stay hidden. If the watchers caught even a whisper of their plan, retaliation would be swift and final. That night, Keen's phone buzzed. It was a message from Damon, a cryptography expert who had once helped him decipher fragments of the FA leak logs. "One of our guys is dead. Boat accident. They're picking us off." Then, nothing. The message hung, unfinished. Keen stared at the screen, cold sweat rising on his skin. Damon wasn't paranoid. If he'd sent that, it meant someone was already scrubbing the edges, erasing anyone who could confirm the leak's legitimacy. The window for truth was closing. Fast. Outside, the world stirred. Protests flared like wildfires across cities. Some mourned the victims and condemned the unrest. Others demanded answers, waving signs that read, "What did they know and when?" Whispers of government foreknowledge took root. The administration reacted the only way it knew how: denial, wrapped in intimidation. On national television, Director Shaw, with eyes like polished stone, delivered a chilling statement. Domestic agitators spreading harmful, baseless conspiracies will be held accountable. This is not a time for fiction, it's a time for unity. But behind the scenes, the real fiction was unraveling. Sarah had uncovered a mention, just a sliver, in a redacted memo, the Saturn files. An internal ledger said to track the money trail in the days and weeks after the attack. Classified budgets diverted into shadow accounts, quietly feeding defense contractors, energy monopolies, and political allies. It was a roadmap of how tragedy became opportunity. "We find this archive," Sarah whispered one night, hunched over her laptop in a darkened safe house, "and we can trace every dollar. That's the real story. The truth they're afraid of." They were in a safe house lent to Sarah by a trusted friend, a former analyst who dropped off-grid years ago. Power was spotty. A single lamp flickered over a table strewn with flash, drives, maps, and half-eaten protein bars. Keen leaned forward, rubbing his temples. "Where?" She clicked on an old CIA memo and pointed to a line buried deep in the metadata. "Defunct NSA facility, out in the desert. It was mothballed years ago, but some say it still has offline backups. No network access, no cloud. If it's there, we'd have to go in, pull it out physically." Keen stared at the screen, feeling the enormity of it settle over him like a weight. He exhaled. "We've got 3 burner phones, a car that sounds like it's dying, and $2,000 in cash. They've got drones, satellites, facial recognition on every street corner. But they won't expect us to break into a facility they think is obsolete," she said, a flicker of hope in her tired eyes. Still, the danger was suffocating. Helicopters had begun sweeping highways at random. Car searches ramped up. Hotels were asked for guest records. Public tension was thick. Keen switched motels daily, grew a beard, wore hats, contact lenses, anything to stay ahead. But he could feel the net tightening. The Watchers weren't just tracking anymore. They were hunting, and now they had escalated. An elite Black Ops unit was reportedly mobilized. Its mission clear: erase the leak before it reached the tipping point. No arrests, no warnings, just silence. The following week was a blur. Keane stayed invisible by day, moving like a ghost between safe houses, back alleys, and roadside diners. At night, he met Sarah wherever they could: cheap motels, abandoned churches, even once beneath a freeway overpass, wrapped in shadows and exhaust fumes. Their meetings were desperate, charged. They didn't waste time. "We found more," Sarah told him, scrolling through a decrypted file on her laptop. Old CIA comms referencing Saturn. It's real. Every transfer, every payout logged in code. If we decrypt the main ledger, we can expose it all. The implications were staggering. The war that had followed the attack, the troops, the budgets, the contracts, none of it about justice. It had been about profit. Fear turned into currency, trauma into power. "That facility," Keane said slowly, eyes narrowing. "If we break in and copy those files, it could collapse the whole narrative. If we survive long enough to upload them," Sarah replied grimly. Neither one said it aloud, but both knew. This wasn't just about evidence anymore. It was about forcing the world to see what it had been trained not to question. The truth, once revealed, might be too massive to contain. It might burn everything down. They had to try, and time was almost up. Maybe, just maybe, the element of surprise had worked in their favor, at least for now. But Director Eldridge Shaw wasn't leaving anything to chance. He tightened the clampdown, like a vice, painting over the chaos with a neat, controlled narrative. Every news outlet echoed the same message. A rogue former FBI analyst has leaked forged foreign intelligence aimed at destabilizing national security. Some swallowed it whole. But a growing number of people weren't so sure anymore, especially after the accidents started piling up. Whistleblowers, archivists, tech consultants, all conveniently tied to either the leaks or the infrastructure behind them, died under strange, violent circumstances. One, a respected data archivist, was found shot to death in his home. The media dismissed it as a botched robbery. No one mentioned the man had publicly supported the leak's authenticity 2 weeks earlier, and yet the black dust was out. On social media, questions grew louder. In downtown squares across the country, angry crowds held signs high. "We deserve the truth, and stop killing our whistleblowers." The Watchers responded like cornered beasts. Protesters were dragged off the streets and labelled rioters. National broadcasts ran warnings about disinformation threats. Public safety alerts ran hourly. Anyone spreading dangerous conspiracy narratives, they said, was aiding terrorists. Keane kept his head down, but the rage inside him festered. If the Saturn files were real, if they could prove that money flowed directly from defense contractors and oil, conglomerates to elected officials immediately after the attack, then this wasn't just a cover-up. It was a business plan. "A lie worth billions," Sarah muttered during one tense night, staring out the window of a motel in rural Texas. "No wonder they're killing people to keep it quiet." They travelled under fake names. IDs printed on cheap plastic by a sympathetic hacker in Kentucky. Keane wore a hoodie and kept his hair dyed dark. Sarah cut hers short and changed her walk to avoid recognition. They took back roads, never stayed, in a motel for more than one night, paid only in cash, and avoided freeways where license plate readers could catch a match in seconds. The government likely knew they were hunting for more evidence, but not the specifics. Not yet. Meanwhile, their paranoia wasn't just theoretical anymore. Billboards went up across the southern states, Keane's face digitally enhanced to look more unhinged than he really was. The words "wanted domestic terrorist" stretched across the top in bold red letters. News anchors repeated warnings to the public. "Turn him in, and you could earn up to $100,000, one cheerful voice announced on the evening news. Every day on the road felt like a coin flip. A gas station glance too long, a clerk asking one question too many. Keen couldn't sleep more than a few hours at a time. He kept a small knife tucked in his boot. Sarah carried a compact revolver, loaded but untouched. Then, one afternoon on a remote highway, a black SUV appeared behind them. Keen glanced in the rearview mirror and felt the blood drain from his face. "We've got company!" Sarah gritted her teeth and yanked the wheel hard, veering off the road and down a dirt path cutting through farmland. The SUV followed instantly, tires kicked up dirt. Then, crack, 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 gunshots. One hit the rear bumper. Another blew a tire. The car jerked sideways and slammed into a shallow ditch. Smoke hissed from the hood. Keen kicked his door open and grabbed the backpack. Sarah followed, stumbling through tall corn. They crouched low, breathing hard as voices echoed nearby. "They're in the field," someone shouted. But after 20 minutes of searching, the agents gave up, likely not wanting to start a gunfight in open farmland. The SUV roared off. Sarah leaned against a fence post, still trembling. "They're not trying to arrest us." "That was a kill order." Keen nodded, heart pounding. "We're getting close. They're scared." 2 days later, they finally reached the edge of the desert. The facility looked like a ghost, hidden beneath the dusty skeleton of an old NSA outpost. Cracked asphalt stretched out before them, overrun by weeds. Rusted fences encircled the grounds, broken in one corner where looters had once cut through. A few crumbling signs still warned, "Authorized personnel only." The sky was dusky purple as they slipped through the breach in the fence. Wind howled through the vents of the main building, carrying a high-pitched metallic moan. Somewhere in the distance, a lone coyote cried. The structure loomed above them, its windows boarded up, its walls streaked with rust. They entered through a side door that barely clung to its hinges. Inside, the air was stale, thick with dust and mold. Flashlights lit a path through dead cubicles and sagging ceiling panels. Water stains streaked the walls. Cabinets had been ransacked. Coffee mugs still sat on desks as if waiting for their owners to return from a very long break. Down a corridor, they found what they were looking for, a sub-level. The metal stairs groaned under their weight as they descended. Below, a room full of ancient server racks stood in eerie silence, except for the soft, rhythmic hum of emergency power still feeding a few battered machines. "There's power," Keen said, eyes narrowing. "That's not a good sign." "Someone's still using this place," Sarah whispered. In the far corner, behind layers of wires and old control panels, they found it. A heavy vault door labeled Archive 6, Server Vault. It was locked, but Sarah had come prepared. From her pocket, she pulled a small USB device loaded with legacy access protocols gleaned from the leaked documents. She connected it to the wall console and launched a bypass script. They waited. Red, 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 then green. The door unlatched with a low mechanical hiss. Inside, rows of servers stretched across the vault. Dust blanketed the floor, but the interior was cool, climate control still functioning. Boxes labeled Cast Peak, Post K Roster, and finally, Saturn FSV. "There," Sarah said, pointing to a battered unit toward the back. Keen gently powered up the terminal beside it. It whirred to life, dim but functional. Sarah connected her laptop, fingers flying across the keyboard. A prompt appeared. Saturn 1.23, enter password. They tried combinations from the files, old acronyms, code names. On the third attempt, beep, access granted. Lines of data exploded across the screen. Spreadsheets, encrypted memos, timestamps, wire transfers. Keen scanned one file and felt bile rise in his throat. This is it. Look at the dates. Days, sometimes hours, after the attack, massive sums had been authorized. Some to shell companies, some to board members of military contractors, others directly to political PACs backing war legislation. One memo read, Phase 2, funding authorized, legislative compliance assured. This isn't just greed, Sarah whispered. This was orchestrated from the start. Keane looked at her. The truth wasn't just sitting in front of them. It was screaming. The scale of what they'd uncovered was overwhelming, almost impossible to grasp. Sarah's hands trembled as she scrolled through the decrypted files. This goes deeper than we ever imagined, she whispered, her voice low and brittle. Top-level bureaucrats, major banks, even journalists, they staged the entire thing. The attacks were engineered to spread fear, pass endless war budgets, keep the arms industry fed. Keane leaned in beside her, face lit only by the pale glow of the screen. His jaw was tight, all of it hidden behind national security, neatly tucked away like it was just another intelligence file. Sarah nodded slowly, eyes wide with disbelief. Some of these notes suggest the hijackers were known assets, controlled even, just set off like a fuse. The room went silent, heavy with the weight of betrayal. Then, thump. Footsteps creaked above them. Not random, measured, closing in. They're here, Sarah muttered, voice barely audible. They must have picked up the surge in power. Keane didn't hesitate. We copy everything, now. His fingers flew across the keyboard, launching a transfer to multiple external drives. Sarah darted across the room, cutting the lights. Darkness fell like a curtain. She ducked behind a console, hand slipping into her jacket to pull out the small pistol she always kept close, just in case. Too late. A flood of harsh white light carved through the darkness. The watchers burst down the stairwell, faceless, armed, moving like they'd done this 1,000 times. A burst of gunfire tore through the room. Sparks flew from the metal server racks as bullets struck steel. Sarah crouched behind cover, fired back. Muffled pops echoed in the chaos. Her shots weren't meant to kill, just to buy time. Keane worked fast, hooking up the portable router, trying to bounce a connection off a secure satellite node. His hands shook as he typed. Progress bar, 10%. Then a voice thundered through the corridor like a judge's gavel. Stop, Director Shaw. His broad silhouette filled the entrance. He stepped forward slowly, his gun low but ready, his eyes locked on Keane. You have no idea what you're about to unleash, Shaw said, voice hard and cold. Entire alliances hang on keeping that day buried. You start this upload, you burn the whole damn world. Gunfire resumed. A bullet grazed Sarah's shoulder, tearing through her jacket and skin. She winced, but stayed firm, laying down, suppressing fire. Progress, 50%. Shaw turned to one of his men and barked an order. A small cylindrical object flew through the air. Flashbang, Sarah shouted, turning away, but not fast enough. Bang! The concussive blast ripped through the room. Ears rang. Vision blurred. Sarah was tackled, wrestled to the ground, gun wrenched from her hand. Keane was thrown against a wall, a boot crushing his laptop. The screen cracked. The upload froze. 80%. Keane's world narrowed. He reached out blindly, grabbed the busted laptop and slammed it into the face of the nearest guard. Blood sprayed. The man dropped. Somehow, that violent jolt sparked the laptop back to life. The upload stuttered and resumed. The watchers scrambled to yank cables. A bullet, no one knew whose, pierced the coolant line. White-hot steam blasted out, hissing like a monster from the pipes. Shaw looked around, realization dawning. This place is gonna blow. He turned back to Keane, raising his pistol. You can die here clinging to your fantasies, or you can disappear and take this lie to your grave. Either way, the truth dies with you. Behind him, a pipe burst. Sparks rained down. Flames licked the edges of the control panels. Progress, 98%. Keane, bloodied and gasping, hit the final keystroke. Upload complete. The system beeped. The files were gone. Sent. Scattered to encrypted drop points across the open web. Unstoppable now. Shaw's face twisted in rage. He raised his weapon. A final shot cracked out. Keen staggered. Darkness swallowed him. A watcher lunged forward, yanking the cord, but it was already over. The Saturn files were loose. The alarms howled. Red lights spun. Flames climbed the walls. The infiltration team panicked. The coolant explosion had triggered a cascade failure in the ancient power grid. Systems collapsed one after another. Sarah, half conscious, was thrown back by a blast wave. Smoke choked the corridor. Steel groaned overhead. The watchers retreated, dragging Shaw away. "Leave them!" someone shouted. "This whole place is coming down!" The sub-basement shook violently. Dust and fire filled the air. A final collapse buried the room in flame and rubble. No one saw Keen again. But the war wasn't lost. Not that night. Within hours, the files were everywhere. Activists, whistleblowers, archivists, anonymous hands around the globe snatched the Saturn files from the dark web and mirrored them across networks. Government sites tried to block them. It was like fighting a tidal wave. Hashtags exploded across social media. Feeds flooded with redacted memos, transcripts, surveillance logs. Words like Operation White Dam, Project Switchboard, Commission for Filter trended worldwide. The documents laid everything bare. Collusion with extremist cells. Carefully timed events designed to trigger panic. Strategic manipulation of public grief. There were internal memos showing government officials calculating acceptable civilian casualties to justify long-term war deployments. Footnotes described media contacts paid to shape narratives. The fallout was immediate. Allies demanded closed-door meetings with Washington. Rival nations called for emergency sessions at the UN. Protesters took to the streets from Paris to São Paulo. In New York, banners waved, "We are not collateral damage." In Berlin, "Release the whole truth." A senior intelligence analyst broke ranks on live TV. "We traded blood for control," she said, eyes wet. "We turned war into a product line." The White House issued statements calling the Saturn files elaborate forgeries. But no one was buying it. There was too much detail, too many confirmed links. The intelligence community, once untouchable, faced its worst credibility crisis since its creation. Heads rolled. Whistleblowers surfaced. Investigations exploded in every direction. And somewhere out there, maybe in hiding, maybe gone, Keen's final act had pulled back the curtain. The truth was out, and the world would never see it the same way again. Anonymous data analysts and cryptographers across the globe began combing through the Saturn files almost immediately. Within days, teams confirmed the digital signatures and metadata, timestamps, login patterns, access histories, all consistent with classified records from 2 decades ago. The findings couldn't be dismissed. Some mid-level intelligence officers, shaken by what they'd seen, broke silence. A few came forward publicly, confirming the document's authenticity. They looked haunted, like they'd carried the weight for years. Back home, the fallout was immediate. Massive crowds gathered in front of government buildings. Handmade signs waved in the air. Justice for the betrayed. Unseal everything. Arrest the real threats. The outrage spread like wildfire. Protesters surrounded defense contractors, shouting the names of executives who'd profited from the wars. Class action lawsuits followed. Stock prices for major weapons manufacturers plummeted. CEOs resigned en masse. Some vanished overnight, rumored to have fled to private compounds overseas. Televised hearings showed retired generals awkwardly reading prepared statements. Some denied involvement outright. Others gave partial confessions, vague enough to imply regret, specific enough to spark media storms. The country was in mourning again, but this time not from foreign attack, from within. Grief turned to anger. Betrayal seeped into conversations at dinner tables, school assemblies, neighborhood barbecues. The media landscape fractured under the weight of truth. At first, Most major outlets tried to ignore the files, chalking them up to unauthenticated leaks, but the evidence was too detailed, too damning. Independent journalists kept publishing. The pressure cracked the mainstream. A few bold anchors changed course, issuing public apologies for parroting the official line for years. "I trusted my sources," one famous face admitted, blinking hard on live TV. "And they lied to all of us." Others held firm, insisting the files were propaganda. But their insistence only fueled the public's distrust. Disinformation campaigns ramped up. Anonymous bot farms flooded feeds. But still, the truth moved faster. "You can't close the barn. Door after the horses have fled," one analyst said grimly during a broadcast. "The architecture of post-attack policy is crumbling in real time." Then came the moment of desperation. Director Eldridge Shaw appeared before cameras in a stiff suit, standing behind a podium flanked by flags. He tried to look composed, but his voice betrayed him. "The integrity of our institutions is under coordinated attack," he declared. "For the sake of national stability, we are invoking emergency protocols under Title IV." The word martial law ignited a firestorm. Instead of calming the public, it shattered what little trust remained. Governors in multiple states refused to cooperate. Some called Shaw's move a power grab. Others labeled it outright unconstitutional. Federal authority fractured overnight. In Washington, lawmakers, some once quiet, now found their voices. Investigations were opened. Independent commissions formed. Evidence review panels sprang up across government agencies. The mood was changing. People were tired of being afraid. Sarah Voss, battered, bruised, but very much alive, resurfaced from the ruins of the southwestern facility. Her appearance stunned the public. Her shoulder was still healing, her voice shaky but steady. "They thought they could stop us," she said in a televised interview. "They thought killing Keane would bury the truth." But he didn't stop, not even as the room burned. A few days later, she published a powerful op-ed titled "One Man's Last Key Press." It detailed the final seconds in the server room, the panic, the gunfire, the blinding steam, and how Thomas Keane, wounded and surrounded, finished the upload with a single, trembling keystroke. Her words struck a nerve. The piece went viral, translated into a dozen languages. Murals of Keane began, appearing in city alleyways. He was no longer just a hacker or a whistleblower. He became a symbol, the man who lit the fuse. At the grassroots level, families of 9/11 victims reopened wounds long buried. They demanded new investigations, new trials. The original commission's credibility was in ruins. Archived testimonies were re-examined. Entire sections of suppressed evidence re-emerged. Some former investigators admitted they'd been pressured, even threatened to leave key details out. The pain of the nation's biggest tragedy returned, but now it had a face. A new villain. Complicity. People asked hard questions. How did this happen? How did fear become so profitable? How did good people look the other way for so long? Globally, the tremors were just as powerful. Allied nations that had supported the wars felt betrayed. Some recalled troops from contested regions. Others launched parliamentary investigations, citing shared intelligence that may have been knowingly distorted. A decades-old world order, built on alliances formed in the ashes of the attack, began to fracture. Uncertainty bloomed in its place. Some believed this chaos might lead to a less militarized future. Others feared new extremist groups might seize the moment. Through it all, whispers persisted. Rumors that Keane might still be alive. Sightings were reported in South America. A blurry photo circulated from an island in the Pacific. Nothing confirmed. Officially, he was presumed dead, killed in the collapse, but conspiracy forums buzzed with hope. "If he lived," Sarah said once in a podcast, "he deserves his peace. He gave us ours." 6 months later, the US Senate convened its most watched hearing in decades. Cameras captured every moment as top figures from the intelligence, defense, and corporate worlds were summoned. Faces from old photographs now sat in suits under harsh lights. Some invoked national security. Some pled the Fifth. A few, tired, broken, confessed. One former assistant director cried as she recounted the day she first saw the documents. "I wanted to tell someone, but I knew what would happen to me if I did." Indictments followed. Not all stuck. The system was too tangled, too protected by decades of self-interest. But symbolically, the damage was done. People saw behind the curtain, and they wouldn't forget. From that point forward, no official story would ever go unquestioned again. At the same time, Saravos launched her own independent media platform. Nothing flashy, just a clean interface with raw daily updates on the False Skies inquiry. It wasn't just news, it was a lifeline. People from every walk of life started submitting their stories. Grainy videos, handwritten notes, scanned documents, anything that might prove the world wasn't as it seemed. Many had long suspected cover-ups, but now they had a place to speak without fear. With her name finally off the blacklists, Saravos didn't hold back. She became a fierce voice for transparency, digging where others wouldn't, asking the questions no one else dared to say out loud. Her rise wasn't a meteoric fame trip, it was gritty, earned, and rooted in something deeper, the hunger for truth. A year after the collapse of the Saturn files, something new stood near the ruins of the original 9/11 memorial. A statue, simple, powerful, showed a lone figure pressing a single key on a keyboard. Below it, etched into stone, were the words, "They took truth from us in the shadows. He brought it back in the light." Visitors came in silence. Some left flowers, others just stared. There was a weight in the air, not just mourning, but something like release. Like maybe, just maybe, the walls around power had cracked enough to let some light through. Epilogue. In a quiet, windswept fishing town on the Oregon coast, a local man told a strange story at a bar. Said he'd seen someone, recognizable, but not quite the same as in the photos that had once been everywhere. The man's hair had gone white from salt and sun, and his eyes were haunted, heavy, like he'd seen too much and carried every inch of it. He said he used to work for the government, the fisherman said, nursing a beer. Said he didn't anymore. Said something about illusions, and the price you pay to break them. According to the story, the man vanished at dawn. No phone, no ID, just left a small, weather-worn flash drive behind, tucked beneath a bait bucket. If it really was Thomas Keane, then he'd chosen to disappear, to leave the spotlight and let others carry the truth forward. Let the leak live without him. Public trust in big institutions never fully recovered. Some people stayed angry. Some clung to hope that real change was coming. On fringe forums and buried threads across the net, debates burned hot. Were the watchers still out there, planning another false flag? Or had they gone to ground, scattered by the leak? But one thing was clear. The greatest lie of modern times had been exposed. The name Black Dust lived on. Less a title, more a symbol. A reminder of what happens when truth finally slips the leash. In the silence that followed, the world held its breath. They had used fear to control people, shape reality, rewrite facts. But one day, fear cracked. Truth didn't knock. It kicked the door down. And when it did, the skies, their illusions, their veils, split wide open. Behind him, Maya Torres rolled her eyes but said nothing. She'd heard this speech from Jason 100 times. MK Ultra, time travel programs, the moon landings, missing frames, government psyops. It was always the same setup, Jason laying it out like a dramatic reveal. But this time something was different. Cut the recording, Jason said, spinning his office chair around to face her. His eyes were sharp, full of that manic spark she'd learned to worry about. You get the email? He asked. Maya tucked a strand of hair behind her ear and gave a slow nod. Yeah, Desert Valley Logistics. You're in. Background check passed. Not. Somehow, Jason said, grinning wide, looking more like a kid about to pull off a prank than a 31-year-old man preparing to infiltrate a government contractor. 6 months of prep, fake references, scrubbed socials, a clean digital footprint. It worked. Maya wasn't as enthusiastic. Delivering food to a military base isn't exactly cracking Area 51, Jace. He leaned forward. It's a foot in the door. No one's gotten closer than this. For over a year, Jason had been tracking Desert Valley Logistics. They weren't just a catering company. They had exclusive contracts with several military installations across Nevada, including the Nevada Test and Training Range. The same range that housed the infamous Area 51. Maya pulled out her tablet and opened a secure folder. The files loaded in silence. "All right," she said, scrolling through checklists. "You start Monday. First month is routine. Deliveries only. Get familiar faces. Memorize layouts. Then you start tracking routes, watch security rotations, checkpoint habits. You'll wear the glasses we built. Which," she added dryly, "cost us almost our entire gear budget." "Worth it," Jason said without hesitation. "They're microscopic, totally invisible to routine sweeps. Transmit straight to your van through the modded smartwatch." The van was a project all its own. Maya had stripped it down and rebuilt. It with satellite uplinks, boosted relays, and a custom VPN that bounced their signal across multiple continents. It was a rolling broadcast center, hidden behind a contractor decal and some dust. Jason's plan was to work his way into trust. Then, during a scheduled delivery, just a regular Tuesday on paper, he'd break pattern, slip away, use his mapped knowledge, and get eyes on parts of the base no outsider had seen in decades. Maybe ever. "You know this isn't just trespassing, right?" Maya said, her voice low. "This is federal territory, black site level. They won't just arrest you, they'll make you disappear." Jason didn't flinch. "That's why we're doing it right. No shortcuts." Maya stared at him for a moment, then exhaled. "You better hope the truth is worth what it's going to cost." Jason's face turned grave, the usual light in his eyes gone. "You know why I'm really doing this, Maya?" She raised an eyebrow, already expecting the answer. "Views? Subscribers?" "No." His voice was flat, final. He turned toward the corkboard on the wall, an obsession in pins and string. Newspaper clippings, printed out forum threads, old, declassified documents, and red lines connecting theories that didn't seem like theories anymore. Maya followed his gaze. "My dad worked at Groom Lake," Jason said quietly. 12 years. Never told us much. Just that he fixed avionics. That's it." He swallowed hard. "One day he came home with these headaches. Bad ones. Didn't go away. 2 months later, he was gone. Stage 4 brain cancer. No warning, no history in the family. Nothing." Maya's expression softened. She'd never seen him talk about this like that. "Jason, I didn't know it was that serious." He kept his eyes on the board, like he couldn't look away. "Before he died, he tried to tell my mum something. He was out of it, on meds, barely coherent, but he kept talking about non-terrestrial, intelligence, about things in the sky that weren't ours. She thought it was the morphine. I don't." Jason's voice caught. He turned back to her, eyes glassy but steady. "I believe him, Maya. I have to believe him. And I need to prove it. Not for clout, not for clicks, for him." Maya didn't argue. She knew him well enough to recognize when his mind was made up. "Okay," she said, exhaling slowly. "The stream goes to a secure server first. If anything happens, anything, it auto-uploads to 17 different sites, redundancies across everything. You're covered." "Dead man's switch," Jason said, nodding. "Yeah," Maya muttered. Not the phrase I'd pick, but yeah. The next 6 weeks passed in a blur. Jason settled into his delivery job at Desert Valley Logistics like he belonged there. He memorized routines, chatted casually with guards, learned which clipboard guy liked sugar in his coffee. He became part of the background, reliable, forgettable. Exactly what he needed to be. Meanwhile, Maya worked her own kind of magic. She transformed an aging white utility van into a rolling surveillance HQ. It had backup power, 3 separate internet sources, hidden antennas, signal scramblers, and a compartment under the floor for emergency drives. She installed foam panels to cut echo, tinted the windows, and camouflaged it to look like just another contractor rig. They tested everything in the desert, again and again. Signal strength, camera feeds, bandwidth, failovers. Maya found remote, parking spots with clean sightlines and weak surveillance zones. The micro cameras worked like a dream. Crystal clear footage beamed back through Jason's modified glasses into Maya's custom-built receiver rig. Online, Jason's followers noticed his posting had slowed down. He kept them on the hook with cryptic updates, working on something big. Truth is coming. Some secrets don't stay buried. His subscriber count crossed the 1 million mark quietly. He didn't celebrate. He barely noticed. 2 days before the planned infiltration, Maya caught Jason staring at an old photo, his father holding him on his shoulders, grinning under the bright summer sun. "We can still pull out," she said gently. Jason shook his head. "No, we're too far in. And look, if I find nothing, if it's just a base, just mess halls and bunkers, I'll say that. I'll report the truth. But if it's not..." He trailed off. "Remember that truck driver?" he asked. "The one from the forum?" Maya nodded slowly. She remembered the thread, a long, jittery post about a late-night delivery to a restricted hangar. The driver claimed he saw aircraft that made no aerodynamic sense. But it wasn't just the machines, it was the people, or whatever they were. Tall, silent, not quite human. The post had vanished within hours. Account deleted, IP scrubbed. "Could have been a hoax," Maya said, though her tone lacked conviction. "Or it could have been confirmation," Jason said. "Either way, we're going to find out." The night before the mission, neither of them slept. Jason reviewed the plan for the 10th time, while Maya ran full diagnostics on every system. "Camera feeds are clean," she said, eyes flicking between monitors. "Audio's good. Encrypted channels are locked and routed through the mesh net." Jason sat on the edge of the van's fold-out bench, unusually still. "Having second thoughts?" Maya asked, turning toward him. He paused. "No, just thinking this might be the most important thing we ever do." Maya reached out and squeezed his hand. "Then stick to the plan. Get in. Document. Get out. No hero stuff." Jason gave a faint smile. "Yes, Mom." Neither of them said what was really on their minds. By this time tomorrow, they'd either change history or vanish from it. The Nevada desert was already sweltering by 9 a.m. as Jason guided the refrigerated delivery truck down the long stretch of road leading to the base. The air conditioning coughed against the heat, and sweat clung to his back beneath the thin polyblend uniform. He wiped one hand on his pants, then tightened his grip on the wheel. "Checkpoint 1 in 2 miles, Maya's voice came through his earpiece. "Calm, steady." "Copy that," Jason replied, adjusting his collar. The Desert Valley Logistics logo on his shirt felt heavier than usual, like a badge, or maybe a mask. The first checkpoint looked exactly as it always did. A small booth, a steel gate, 2 armed guards, and a camera dome overhead. Jason had been through it dozens of times, but today felt different. He rolled down the window and handed over his ID badge and manifest. "Morning, Reeve," the guard said, scanning his credentials. Jason smiled politely. "Morning. Running a little behind. Supply depot changed my loadout last minute." The guard barely glanced at him. "Yeah, they've been a mess lately. You're good. Go ahead." The gate buzzed, then swung open with a dull, metallic groan. Jason drove forward. His heart was pounding. Not from fear, at least not entirely. It was anticipation, resolve. Because from this point on, every second mattered. Every movement was part of something much bigger. Behind him, in the distance, the desert shimmered in the heat. Ahead of him, the unknown waited. Jason kept his eyes steady, hiding the nervous twitch in his fingers as he approached the first gate. The man on duty was Peterson, someone he'd chatted with earlier that morning while sipping vending machine coffee. Just light talk, weather, road conditions, nothing memorable. Still, it made this exchange feel less clinical. Traffic was light, Jason said, his voice calm, as if rehearsed. The glasses perched on his face were doing more than correcting his vision. They were recording everything, transmitting the footage in real time to Maya, parked 3 miles back in a nondescript, white van. Peterson scanned the documents Jason handed him, flipping through them quickly. "All clear," he said with a nod. "Stick to the designated route." Jason gave a casual nod, put the truck in gear, and rolled forward. The first barrier gate lifted with a groan, and he crossed into the outer perimeter of the restricted zone. Dust curled up in the rearview mirror as the truck rumbled over the cracked asphalt. His chest tightened. "First checkpoint clear," he whispered, pressing a discreet mic button on his watch. "How's the feed?" "Crystal clear," Maya replied instantly through the earpiece. 35 people already tuned in to the private stream. "I'm not putting this public until you're out safe." "Copy that," he muttered. The road stretched endlessly ahead, cutting through an empty desert that looked like it hadn't seen rain in years. On both sides, camera towers loomed, silent, watching. Jason had memorized their positions and ranges during his months of prior deliveries. He knew which ones were real-time monitored and which were likely automated. More importantly, he knew the gaps. "Second checkpoint in sight," he reported after about 15 minutes. This one was different, less friendly, more military. Jason's palms grew damp as he eased the truck to a stop. 2 guards were already walking toward him, rifles slung across their chests. One reached for his clipboard, flipping through the delivery manifest without a word. The other knelt down with a long-handled mirror, scanning the undercarriage of the vehicle. "Please step out of the vehicle, sir," the first guard said, his tone firm but not aggressive. Jason obeyed. Every step felt heavier than it should have. He was hyper-aware of the camera glasses on his face, the weight of the modified watch on his wrist, broadcasting everything back to Maya. "Routine inspection," the guard explained, but his tone suggested otherwise. Like maybe he didn't quite buy the word routine. "Arms out," the second guard instructed. Jason lifted his arms. The handheld scanner buzzed faintly as it swept over his body. When it passed over his wrist, the device gave a sharp beep. The guard looked up, eyes narrowing. "Standard issue. GPS tracker," Jason said quickly. "Company policy. All drivers wear them. Safety stuff." The guard held his gaze for a second, then gave a slow nod. "Makes sense." The watch had been custom modified by Maya, camouflaged to pass as a GPS tracker if scanned, but capable of 2-way encrypted comms and a hidden data uplink. It had passed the test. "Your delivery today is for the mess hall?" the guard asked, checking the manifest again. "Yes, sir. Weekly supply run. Nothing thrilling. Just frozen vegetables and canned beans," Jason answered, keeping his tone light. The guard stared at him a little too long. "You've been on this route for a while now." "About 3 months," Jason said. "It's a good gig. No traffic out here and I like the quiet." The guard didn't smile, but after a long pause, handed back the clipboard. "Proceed to delivery point Charlie. Do not deviate from the marked route. Any unauthorized stops will result in immediate detention." Jason nodded, climbed back into the truck, and shut the door behind him with a soft click. As the second gate lifted, he took a deep breath. This was it. "I'm in," he whispered to Maya. "Second checkpoint cleared. Viewer counts climbing fast," she replied. "People are sharing the private link. Almost 200 watching now." The road sloped downward into a wide valley, and suddenly the base opened up in front of him. A vast sprawl of hangars, radar towers, and low-slung concrete buildings stretched into the distance, some of them humming faintly with unseen power. There were structures with no windows, others with no markings at all. Jason slowed the truck. "Maya, you seeing this?" Yep, she whispered. It's bigger than we thought. He nodded, though she couldn't see. No turning back. Now! The GPS guided him toward a long rectangular building on the east side of the complex. It looked like a commissary. Plain, practical, nothing flashy. He backed the truck into the loading dock with the ease of someone who'd done this a dozen times. 2 workers waited for him by the platform. One of them, Gaza, was a thick-necked man with sweat stains already blooming under his armpits despite the dry air. Jason recognized him from previous runs. Routine delivery, Jason said, popping the truck door open and grabbing a clipboard. I've got 26 crates today. Gaza gave a bored nod. We'll take it from here. This was the moment. The part where, according to protocol, Jason was supposed to stay with the vehicle while the workers did the unloading. But today, that wasn't the plan. Actually, Jason said casually, flipping through the paperwork, I need to verify the cold storage items personally. New company policy after that spoilage incident last month. Pain in the ass, but they're cracking down. Gaza gave a heavy sigh and looked toward the building. Fine, he grunted. Follow me. This was exactly what Jason had been hoping for. An excuse to step inside. Gaza didn't think twice, just held the door open with one hand and lumbered through the loading bay's double doors. Jason followed, eyes darting subtly from left to right, mentally noting every hallway, every turn. The moment Gaza was a few paces ahead, Jason muttered under his breath. Feed still good? Perfect, Maya answered in his ear, calm but cautious. But don't push it. You're already deeper than we planned for phase 1. I know, he whispered. They passed through a wide industrial kitchen where the hum of refrigeration units and the clatter of metal trays echoed off the sterile walls. Jason kept pace, breathing slowly, acting the part. Beyond the kitchen was a large walk-in fridge. Cold air rushed out as Gaza swung open the heavy insulated door. Jason stepped in, pretending to check temperatures and inspect packaging labels. His glasses captured every detail. Serial numbers, supplier names, expiration dates, thermal sensors, floor layout. After a few minutes of feigned professionalism, he straightened. I need to use the restroom before I head back. Is there one nearby? Gaza barely looked up from the crate he was scanning. Down that hall, he said, gesturing vaguely. First door on the left. Thanks, Jason said casually. But as soon as Gaza's back turned, Jason took a different route. Instead of going left, he turned right, away from the common areas, deeper into the facility. Jason! Maya's voice crackled with sudden tension. What are you doing? That's not the plan. Change of plans, he whispered. I might not get another shot like this. Jason? He moved quickly, but without looking rushed. Just another guy who belonged there. The corridor was plain and bland, with the same scuffed white walls, beige linoleum floor, and tacky motivational posters pinned beside laminated safety notices. A janitor's cart sat unattended near a supply closet. It was the kind of place no one really noticed. 600 viewers, Maya said, her voice tight. Word is spreading. Fast. Jason reached a junction. Here, the design shifted. The lighting dimmed slightly, and the walls took on a darker tone, matte grey with no trim, no posters, no windows. The air felt still, almost too still. Ahead of him, a door marked by a black panel and a keypad stood out. He exhaled. Dead end, he muttered, stepping forward to turn back. Then, click. The door opened from the inside. A woman in a white lab coat stepped out, eyes glued to a tablet. She nearly walked into him. Jason froze, but only for a fraction of a second. Excuse me, he said, pitching his voice higher, lacing it with confusion. I think I'm lost, trying to get back to the loading dock. She stopped abruptly and looked up at him, brows pinched. How did you get in this wing? He pointed vaguely behind him. I'm with the food delivery team. First time doing this route. Took a wrong turn, I guess. She hesitated. Her eyes scanned him. Uniform, badge, clipboard. She seemed unsure, but not alarmed, This area's restricted, she said. You need to go back. Second left, then follow the signage. Got it, Jason nodded. Thanks. She turned and walked away. Jason watched her go. Then he noticed the door hadn't latched. It hung slightly ajar. The red security light blinked softly, waiting for the lock to engage. Jason, don't, Maya said sharply in his ear. I know what you're thinking. Don't do it. But he was already moving. He slipped through the door before it could close, his breath caught in his throat. On the other side, everything changed. I'm in, he whispered, adrenaline spiking. And Maya, you won't believe this. Define what you're seeing, she shot back, and start moving back to the exit, now. Jason didn't move. He stood frozen, struggling to make sense of what lay before him. This corridor was nothing like the rest of the facility. The walls shimmered faintly, made of some dull, metallic material that wasn't steel. It had a faint iridescence, a strange glow, like oil on water in low light. He turned slowly in place, letting his glasses capture every inch. The walls, he whispered. They're lined with some kind of alloy. It's not steel. It glows, but not from light. More like it's alive. The corridor curved ahead gently, as if leading him somewhere with intent. The lighting wasn't from fixtures. Soft, pulses of light came from behind the walls themselves, dim and rhythmic, like breathing or a distant heartbeat. There were no doors, no junctions, just a single path forward. Maya, he murmured. This place wasn't on any of the maps. It doesn't match anything in the blueprints I reviewed. Viewer count just past 1,000, Maya reported, her voice more anxious now. The stream is blowing up, but Jason, listen to me. Get out now. This wasn't part of the plan. I can't, Jason said quietly. Not when I'm this close. He stepped forward. The air grew colder with each footfall. Subtle vibrations passed through the soles of his boots, like the hum of machinery, or something deeper, something older. His breath fogged in front of him. There are markings, he said, stopping beside a wall. Etched into the surface. They don't look like writing, not English, not any language I know. More like symbols, glyphs. The camera on his glasses zoomed, capturing the strange carvings. They shimmered faintly under the rhythmic lighting. Jason, you're out of time, Maya warned. Security will notice you're not in the loading zone. You need to move now. Wait, Jason whispered suddenly. He held up a hand. A sound. Low, melodic. A hum that resonated in his chest more than in his ears. It didn't seem to come from anywhere, but from everywhere at once. Like the air itself was singing. Maya, he said, barely audible. You hear that? She didn't answer right away. Then, yes, I hear it. The hum grew louder. Something was awakening. The sound wasn't random anymore. It pulsed, low, rhythmic, almost like breathing. No, more like language, patterns, intentional. Maya froze beside him, her voice barely more than a breath. What is that? Jason shook his head, slowly, eyes locked ahead. I don't know, but I think I'm about to find out. The narrow corridor began to widen, gradually opening into a dome-shaped chamber. Jason stepped inside first and stopped dead in his tracks. He let out an audible gasp. Suspended in the middle of the room was something impossible. It hovered, roughly 3 feet off the ground, with no cables, no support, just hanging there in open air. It wasn't just a machine. It wasn't just biology. It was both, and neither. A grotesque fusion of organic curves and technological precision. The surface shimmered like a translucent membrane, pulsing with light from within. Deep blues and shifting purples like watching a storm swirl under glass. Are you seeing this, Maya? Jason's voice was tight, shaking. Please, tell me you're recording this. I'm recording, she replied, breathless now, her earlier skepticism forgotten. But Jason, What the hell is that? The object pulsed again, slower this time, almost as if it had heard them, almost as if it were aware. Jason stepped forward, his shoes scuffing softly against the cold floor. It changed. The lights. It reacted to me. Around the edges of the chamber, circular workstations and lab terminals were arranged in a precise ring. Monitors glowed dimly in the dark, feeding lines of data and looping diagrams. Jason moved toward one, his augmented glasses scanning and capturing everything. Symbols blinked on screen, unfamiliar notations, streams of calculations, heartbeat-like, pulses tracked in digital waves. "This is it," he murmured. "This is what my father was talking about. It's not just some alien tech. They've got a living entity in here. Or something that thinks it's alive." Jason. Maya's voice was tight, worried. "Please be careful." He didn't respond, circling slowly around the object. The walls of the chamber caught his attention, covered in the same strange symbols they'd passed in the corridor, only here they were arranged in patterns. Constellations, maybe. Maps. "These look like star charts," Jason said, zooming in with his glasses. "But none of these are from our solar system. Maybe not even our galaxy." The hum grew louder, deeper. The air felt denser, colder. Frost began forming along the edges of the metal tables nearby, creeping silently across their surfaces. "Jason," Maya said through the comms, "we've got over 2,000 live viewers now. The chat's blowing up. People think this is either the biggest discovery in history or the biggest hoax." Jason reached out slowly. "It's real," he whispered. "I can feel it. There's a kind of static, like the air's alive." His fingers hovered inches from the entity's skin-like surface. Then, suddenly, a voice. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Jason jerked back and spun around. A man stood at the chamber's entrance. White lab coat, mid-50s, balding, glasses, perched low on his nose. He didn't look like a government spook or a scientist from the movies. He looked ordinary, calm. "You're not cleared to be here," the man said evenly. He didn't raise an alarm, didn't reach for a weapon. Jason steadied himself. "What is that thing?" he asked, pointing back at the entity. The man sighed. "That's classified." Jason narrowed his eyes. "But you know who I am." The man nodded once. "We know your channel, your theories, your late-night streams from the desert. I've been watching you for a while, Mr. Reeve." Jason felt his stomach drop. "We? The project team," the man said. He stepped further into the room, his tone never changing. "Though I suspect you're more interested in that than in who we are." Behind him, the entity pulsed again, faster now. Its appendages, which had been drifting like seaweed in slow current, began to twitch and extend, almost agitated. "Is it alive?" Jason asked, instinctively stepping between the man and the being. "In a sense," the man replied. "Not like you or me. It doesn't have blood or cells. It doesn't need air. It exists in overlapping states, quantum and spatial. We believe it might operate across dimensions." Jason's voice was hushed. "You're studying it." "We're trying to communicate with it," the man corrected. "But it's difficult. We don't fully understand its language, or if what it's doing is even communication." Jason's mind reeled. This wasn't just evidence of alien life. This was contact. Real contact. Ongoing research. A living mystery. And a cover-up that went back decades. "How long has it been here?" he asked. The man didn't flinch. "Since 47, though it wasn't always like this. It's evolved." Jason swallowed hard. The hum of the entity grew louder. The lights in the chamber flickered, and for the first time, Jason wondered not if it was intelligent, but if it was watching them too. A sudden klaxon shattered the stillness, echoing through the metal corridors beyond the chamber. Red emergency lights flickered outside, casting frantic pulses across the room. The man in the lab coat didn't even flinch. He exhaled slowly. as though this interruption had been inevitable. "That would be security," he said, glancing at the door. "They've noticed your little detour." Jason took a step back, his eyes darting to an alternate exit across the chamber. "I guess this is the part where you have me arrested." "I had hoped for more time," the man said, not moving. His voice sounded genuinely disappointed. "Time? For what?" "To explain." The man gestured calmly to Jason's smart glasses. "Yes, I know you're live streaming. That's why I came in here myself, instead of letting the guards drag you out. There are things you need to hear before the world does." Jason narrowed his eyes. "Why me? Why tell me anything?" "Because..." The scientist's gaze shifted toward the entity, which was now glowing with an almost hypnotic rhythm. "Because it wants me to." Jason blinked. It's been waiting. For someone like you." Before Jason could react, the chamber exploded with light. The entity flared, an explosion of brilliance so intense he had to shield his eyes. His earpiece crackled, and Maya's panicked voice broke through the interference. "Jason! The feed's glitching!" "Something's wrong." The hovering form began to spin, slowly at first, then faster, its membrane thinning until it became fully translucent. Inside was a tangled web of structures, interlocking, glowing, impossibly complex, like circuitry, grown from bone and crystal, technology that pulsed with a heartbeat. "What's happening?" Jason shouted. "Contact!" the scientist breathed. His expression was transformed, awed, almost reverent. "It's never done this before." Suddenly, a high-pitched tone rang out, sharp and invasive. Jason clutched at his ears, staggering. Then, a voice, not spoken, not heard, felt. It echoed through his mind like a memory he had never made. The words weren't English, or any language he knew, but he understood them completely. "You have found us at last." Jason staggered backward, gasping. "Maya, are you getting this?" Her voice came through distorted, warped by static. "The signal's bad, Jason. Viewers are still flooding in, over 20,000 now, but the video's flickering. Audio's worse. What's happening?" The entity pulsed again, casting strange shadows that seemed to bend around objects as if the light wasn't behaving normally anymore. The shadows twisted unnaturally along the floor and walls. Jason's breath came in clouds now. The temperature was dropping fast. The scientist stood frozen, mesmerized. He hadn't moved from the console. "We have waited," the voice continued, inside Jason's head. "Through cycles of your star, we waited, for one who could see." Jason looked up at the spinning being. "See what? What do you mean?" "The truth between worlds." The scientist suddenly sprang into action, fingers flying across. "A console. This is unprecedented," he murmured, eyes wide. 75 years, and this is the first time it's actually initiated direct contact. Real contact. The alarm still screamed outside the chamber, but no guards came through the doors. It was like the entire facility had been frozen in place, waiting. Jason stared at the entity. "What? What are you?" The thing responded, not with words, but with motion. Its appendages unfolded again, weaving into the air a shimmering geometric pattern that seemed to shift in dimensions Jason couldn't fully grasp. His vision blurred, around the edges, and he blinked as frost began forming on his eyelashes. "We are not what you call alien, not foreign, not extraterrestrial. We are observers, travelers, collectors of knowledge. We move between what you perceive as reality. We have always been here, in the in-between." Jason felt his throat tighten. "So, you're not from another planet?" The scientist chuckled softly. "We've been telling the suits for decades. They're not from space. They're from somewhere else. A dimension that intersects with ours, like two pieces of glass pressed together. Sometimes, if the angle is right, one side leaks into the other." Jason stared at him, then back at the entity, which pulsed in what he knew was agreement. You see only 3 dimensions. Occasionally, you glimpse a 4th. We exist in many more. Jason's voice trembled. You've been here since 1947. A fragment of us crossed over then. The scientist added, the nuclear detonations, they didn't just unleash energy, they tore something open. The Trinity test, and the ones after it. Quantum fabric ripped wide. We still don't understand it. Jason's mind reeled. Roswell wasn't a crash. It was a breach. A point of incursion, the scientist confirmed. This entity, or a part of it, manifested here because of that rift. He reached for his earpiece. Maya, are you still there? Her voice came through weakly, full of static. Jason, the signal's almost gone, but there's something else. I'm hearing chatter, military frequencies. There, scrambling jets, locking down airspace. Something big is happening. Jason turned to the man. Why now? Why communicate now? After all this time, the scientist looked genuinely perplexed. I don't know. It's never shown interest in dialogue. It watches. It permits us to study it. But this? He shook his head. The voice returned, stronger, now resonant, undeniable, because you are the messenger. Jason stared at the shifting light before him, heart pounding, sweat cold on his back. It wasn't just glowing now. It pulsed, alive with intelligence. Somewhere in the back of his mind, he heard the voice again, not with his ears, but inside his head. The one who will share truth through my channel. Jason took a shaky breath. My followers, they need to know. People have to see this. The world needs to understand. The walls, they're thinning. The light flared, suddenly brighter, patterns forming within it, lines, curves, symmetrical distortions. At first, they looked random, but then something in his mind clicked. They weren't random at all. Mathematical equations, floating in space, diagrams of impossible geometry, multi-dimensional space, explained in symbols more intuitive than words. It's showing me something, Jason whispered. He winced, pressing a hand to his temple. His head felt like it was splitting open, flooded with a torrent of raw data. Coordinates? No. Predictions, models of reality, of time. Beside him, the scientist moved closer, his face ghost white in the eerie light. What does it mean? He asked, though Jason wasn't sure if he was talking to him or the thing pulsing in the chamber. Then the voice came again, lower this time, colder. Your weapons tear reality again. Not with force, with observation. Jason blinked. What? The scientist stiffened. Quantum observation, but on a macro scale, like reality is reacting to being watched. The watchers change what is watched, the entity said. The lights in the room dimmed, and Jason noticed the change in the air, like pressure building before a storm. The sky darkens, the voice continued. They come through the tears. Jason's throat tightened. Who? Who comes through? There was no answer, not in words. Instead, his mind was flooded with images, shadows sliding between stars, things that moved without form, beings so vast and alien they dwarfed any concept of scale. He couldn't tell if they were made of light or absence, just that they were. Other, he gasped. Others, from outside, from beyond our dimension. The others do not observe, the voice said, now laced with static and strain. They consume. The scientist had turned pale. His voice dropped to a whisper. It's warning us. It's trying to warn us. Warn us about what? Jason asked, though he already knew. His hands trembled. Suddenly, a harsh alarm cut through. The chamber, a sound deeper and more urgent than anything they'd heard before. Red emergency lights burst to life, strobing in strange, unfamiliar sequences. Not a standard pattern, not something anyone had rehearsed. The scientist looked up, panic etched across his features. They're activating containment protocols, Jason's eyes widened. Because of me? No, the scientist said, voice hollow. He pointed toward the floating entity. Because of that. The entity was changing. Its membrane shivered unnaturally, as if it no longer fit within the laws of physics. The blue and violet hues of its body flickered, replaced by a deep, sickening crimson. The voice in Jason's mind crackled, warping. Too late. Tear already opening. They sense me. They come. Maya, Jason said, pressing 2 fingers to the earpiece. Static hissed in reply. Then her voice, faint and broken. Something's interfering. Jason, the stream is breaking up. The entity convulsed violently. One of its tendrils lashed out and passed through a nearby console like smoke through glass. Sparks burst. Screens went black. It's losing cohesion, the scientist muttered, backing away slowly. It's not stable here anymore. It's phase shifting, drifting between dimensions. With a hiss, the chamber doors slid open. A squad of armed personnel rushed in, clad in unfamiliar containment suits, their helmets featureless. Black insignia, no names, no flags. Down on the ground, one shouted, weapon raised. Jason lifted his hands but didn't kneel. People need to see this, he said. He gestured toward his glasses, still recording. Thousands are watching. They need to know. Not anymore, the leader said flatly. All signals from this facility are blocked. Jason turned to the scientist, looking for confirmation. The man nodded grimly. It's true, Jason shook his head. It doesn't matter. The stream went through multiple relays. It's out. There already. You can't erase the truth. A piercing whine erupted from the entity, making everyone flinch. The lights flickered. For a moment, the room itself shimmered, reality bending, like the air above a hot road. The voice came again, a dying echo. Tell them. The sky has changed. The stars move. They come. One of the containment officers turned to the scientist. Sir, Project Overthrow has been authorized. We're moving you to a secure location. The scientist's face drained of blood. Project Overthrow hasn't been activated since 1979. Jason stepped forward. What is that? What's Project Overthrow? The scientist hesitated. Then, barely above a whisper. Dimensional reset. A protocol to sever connections between planes. To shut the door. Jason stared at him. And the entity? The man looked at the creature, now violently spasming, its form stuttering like a broken hologram. It'll be forced back, along with anything else that doesn't belong here. Jason's stomach turned. He tapped his earpiece again, not even sure it was working. Maya, he whispered. If you can hear this, download everything, back it up, get it out, tell the world. Because he knew, in that moment, that the door wasn't just closing, it was breaking. The armed personnel closed in around Jason, weapons raised, eyes behind their visors unreadable. The room felt heavier with every step they took. The man at the front, clearly the leader, spoke with the cold precision of someone long used to authority. Jason Reeve, he said flatly, you are hereby detained under National Security Directive 133. Surrender all recording devices immediately. Jason didn't move. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. He could still feel the presence of the entity. Faint, but not gone. The lights overhead buzzed, flickering like they were fighting to stay real. Then it happened. The entity screamed. It wasn't just a sound. It was a pressure inside the skull, a sharp, slicing force that bypassed the ears and went straight to the mind. Jason dropped to his knees, and so did the soldiers. The scream was both audible and not, a psychic roar that shattered thought itself. Remember, the voice rang inside Jason's mind, echoing like thunder inside a collapsing cave. His vision dimmed, tears springing unbidden to his eyes. The chamber around him twisted, walls bending inward, shadows stretching impossibly long. The last thing he saw was the entity folding in on itself, collapsing into a vortex of impossible color. Light and shadow swirling into a singularity that warped the air like it was fabric stretched too tight. Then, everything went black. 3 days later, Maya Torres sat hunched in her dark apartment, the only light coming from half a dozen monitors flickering with data streams, video files, and code. Cold coffee sat beside her keyboard, untouched for hours. Empty takeout boxes and energy drink cans lined the floor like the aftermath of a siege. Her eyes, bloodshot and dry, stayed locked on the same loop, the final seconds of Jason's live stream. Again and again, she watched the entity collapse, the soldiers move in, Jason fall. 73 minutes. That's how long the stream had lasted. The feed cut just as Jason hit the floor. Over 50,000 people had seen it live. Then, like clockwork, the denial machine roared to life. Government statements claimed it was a hoax, an elaborate digital art piece, they said. Social media platforms flagged the footage as misinformation. YouTube pulled it, Twitter buried it, Reddit wiped threads faster than they appeared. News networks stayed silent. No headlines, no panels, just silence. And yet, the footage kept surfacing. Mirrored, clipped, compressed, re-uploaded in back alleys of the internet. Maya had spent every waking hour chasing those fragments, trying to preserve them, re-upload them, map them. But it was like fighting a flood with a paper cup. She hadn't slept more than an hour at a time. She'd tried contacting Jason. Texts, calls, emails. She even called Desert Valley Logistics directly. Every message bounced back with either a form letter or a dead end. HR lines went straight to voicemail. No records, no responses. It was like Jason Reeve had never existed. Maya leaned back and rubbed her temples. On her center monitor, the entity's final collapse replayed in slow motion. She'd run the footage frame by frame. The distortion wasn't digital. It was real. Space bending, air rippling, the camera catching brief flashes of things that shouldn't exist. No special effects. Team could have done it live, her phone buzzed. Another takedown notice. This one from some obscure video site she'd uploaded to just hours earlier. They can't erase everything, she muttered under her breath. She'd said it so many times, it had become a kind of prayer. Another knock. Maya stiffened. Her apartment had no visitors. Almost no one even knew where she lived. She rose slowly, crossing the room and stopping just short of the door. Heart pounding, she peered through the peephole. A delivery person stood outside, holding a small padded envelope. "Delivery for Torres," the person said, voice muffled through the door. Maya frowned. "I didn't order anything." The person shrugged. "Just doing my job, ma'am." They held out the envelope and a digital pad. "Sign here." Still suspicious, Maya kept the chain locked, opened the door just enough to reach through, and signed. The delivery person handed her the envelope and left without another word. She closed the door, locked it, bolted it, then stared at the envelope. No return address, just her name in all caps, printed neatly. Hands shaking slightly, she tore it open. Inside, a single unmarked black USB drive. Maya stared at it for a long moment, then walked it carefully over to her offline workstation. A secure, isolated rig with no internet access, built exactly for moments like this. She inserted the drive. Her antivirus scanned it. Clean. There was only one file. Audio. Labeled Final. While she clicked play. Jason's voice filled the room. It was garbled, crackling with interference, like it was coming from the edge of a storm, or the edge of existence. "Maya, if you're hearing this..." The dead man's switch worked. "I don't know what happened after they took me. I don't know if I'm still alive, or if I'm still here." She covered her mouth as tears began to fall, listening, frozen. "I need you to understand what I saw, what it showed me. It wasn't just communicating, it was broadcasting, through me, through all of us, trying to get the word out." His voice trembled, warped by distance, but full of urgency. Other dimensions aren't science fiction. They're real, and they're bleeding into ours. It showed me the tiers, places where reality is breaking down, where they can slip through. The things we saw, they weren't watching, they weren't learning, they were waiting. Jason paused, breathing shaky. Then, softer. It needed people to know. It needed us. Because something is coming, Maya. And once it arrives, there won't be time to prepare. The recording clicked. Off. Maya sat in silence, staring at the monitor. She opened her backup console and began uploading the file to every secure mirror she had access to. Encrypted folders, cloud lockers, distributed ledgers. She knew it wouldn't last long, but it didn't have to. Just long enough. They'll try to bury you, she whispered, but not before I make the ground shake. And as the upload bar ticked forward, a storm began to build, not outside, but online. A whisper through hidden forums, private messages, sudden reposts. The truth wasn't dead, it had just gone quiet. For a moment.